The night Elena Ward knocked on Jonah Hale's door, she held two things: a 6-month-old baby with eyes that could break a man's heart, and a secret that would shatter the silence he'd built around himself for 7 years. She didn't beg, she didn't cry. She just stood there in the freezing wind, half dead from cold, and said 5 words that would change everything. "I can work. Please." What Jonah didn't know was that the men hunting her were already close, and the choice he made in that moment would force him to become someone he'd sworn he'd never be again. If you want to see how far a man will go to protect what he thought he'd lost forever, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind that night carried the smell of coming snow. Jonah Hale stood at the window of his ranch house, watching the last light die behind the mountains. The glass was cold against his palm, fogged at the edges where the warmth of the stove met the bitter air outside. He'd been standing there for 10 minutes, maybe longer, not really seeing anything, just existing in the space between day and night, the way he'd existed for the past 7 years. The house behind him was quiet. Too quiet. It had been that way since Margaret died. He turned away from the window, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The kitchen was clean because he kept it that way, not because anyone cared. The stove radiated heat into the empty room. On the table sat the remains of his dinner, a plate with half-eaten beans, bread he'd made himself that had come out too dense, a cup of coffee gone cold. Jonah was 42 years old. He looked 50. Hard work and harder grief had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there a decade ago. His hair, once dark brown, was threaded with gray. His hands were scarred and calloused from years of ranch work done mostly alone. He'd posted the notice in town 3 weeks ago, a simple card tacked to the board outside the general store. Cook wanted, room and board. Inquire at Hale Ranch, 10 miles north. No one had come. He hadn't really expected anyone to. The ranch was too far out, too isolated, and everyone in town knew his story, knew he was the widower who'd buried his wife and unborn child, knew he'd turned into the kind of man who didn't talk much, didn't smile, didn't want company. Jonah picked up his plate and carried it to the sink. Through the window above the basin, he could see his breath clouding in the air outside. The temperature was dropping fast. It would be below 0 by midnight. He was reaching for the pump handle when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A knock. Jonah froze, his hand still extended. For a moment he wondered if he'd imagined it. The wind played tricks out here, made noises that sounded almost human. But then it came again. 3 soft, deliberate knocks on the front door. He moved through the house cautiously, every sense alert. Visitors didn't come to his ranch unannounced. Hell, visitors didn't come at all. He picked up the rifle he kept by the door, checked that it was loaded, then pulled the door open. The woman standing on his porch looked like death itself had given her a temporary reprieve. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair plastered to her face by melted snow. Her coat was thin, inadequate for the weather, and beneath it she wore a dress that had once been decent but was now torn at the hem and stained with mud and something that might have been blood. But what stopped Jonah's breath in his chest wasn't the woman herself. It was the baby in her arms. The infant was wrapped in blankets, only its face visible. A small, perfect face with eyes that were open and alert despite the cold. Those eyes locked onto Jonah's with an intensity that seemed impossible for something so small, so new to the world. "I saw your notice," the woman said. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "In town. 3 weeks ago. I can work. Please." Jonah stared at her. Snow was falling harder now, landing on her shoulders, on the blankets surrounding the baby. She swayed slightly, as if standing upright required all her remaining strength. "It's 20 degrees out here," he said. It wasn't an answer, just a fact. "I know." She didn't elaborate. "Where'd you come from?" "Town. I walked." "That's 10 miles." "Yes." Jonah's mind worked through the implications. 10 miles in this weather, carrying an infant, in that coat. She should be dead. The fact that she was standing at all spoke to either incredible luck or a will to survive that bordered on supernatural. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena Ward." She paused. "This is Lucas." The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Elena shifted him in her arms, and Jonah saw her wince. Through the gap in her coat, he caught a glimpse of her wrist. Dark bruises, the color of old storms, circled the pale skin. Something cold that had nothing to do with the weather settled in his gut. "You running from something?" he asked quietly. Elena's eyes met his, gray eyes, he noticed, the color of winter sky. In them he saw fear, yes, but also something harder, something that refused to break. "I'm running toward work," she said. "That's all you need to know." It was a non-answer, and they both knew it. Jonah should have closed the door, should have told her to go back to town, find the sheriff, get proper help. Getting involved in whatever trouble she was carrying would be foolish at best, dangerous at worst. But the baby made that sound again, and Elena's face went soft in a way that made Jonah's chest ache with a pain he'd thought he'd successfully buried. He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Get inside before you freeze to death." Elena didn't thank him. She just moved past him into the house, bringing with her the smell of snow and wood smoke and something else. Fear, maybe, or desperation. Jonah closed the door behind her and set his rifle back in its place. When he turned around, she was standing in the middle of his kitchen, still holding the baby, looking around the space with the careful attention of someone cataloging exits. "Sit down," Jonah said, gesturing to the chair nearest the stove. She sat, but kept her coat on, kept the baby clutched tight. Jonah went to the stove and poured what was left of his coffee into a clean cup. He added whiskey from the bottle he kept in the cupboard. Not much, just enough to warm her from the inside. He set the cup on the table in front of her. "Drink." Elena shifted the baby to one arm and picked up the cup with a hand that shook. She drank, and some color returned to her face. The baby, Lucas, watched Jonah with those same unnervingly alert eyes. "When'd you last eat?" Jonah asked. "Yesterday morning." "And him?" "I fed him 4 hours ago." Her voice was defensive. "I have milk. He's fine." Jonah moved to the stove and began pulling out food. Bread, butter, the leftover beans, some dried meat. He worked in silence, aware of her watching him with the same wary attention she'd given the room. He set a plate in front of her. "Eat." "I haven't agreed to work yet. I can't take—" "It's food, not a marriage proposal. Eat." She ate. Not delicately, not slowly. She ate like someone who didn't know when the next meal might come. Jonah watched her, this stranger who'd walked 10 miles through the snow with a baby in her arms, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. When she'd finished, she sat back in the chair, some of the terrible tension leaving her shoulders. The baby had fallen asleep against her chest, his small face peaceful. "The job," Elena said. "Is it still available?" "Might be." "Tell me what you can do." "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, keep a house. I'm strong, stronger than I look. I won't complain and I won't ask for wages beyond room and board." "Everyone asks for wages." "I'm not everyone." Jonah studied her, the bruises on her wrist, the way she positioned herself with her back to the wall, the careful blankness in her expression that spoke of practice at hiding emotion. "You have experience?" he asked. "I kept house for my—" She stopped, corrected herself. "I kept house for 5 years. I can show you what I can do." "And the baby?" Her arms tightened protectively. "Lucas won't be any trouble. He's quiet. I can work with him on my back if I need to. He won't interfere." "That's not what I'm asking." Elena's jaw set. "Then what are you asking?" Jonah wasn't entirely sure. He was thinking about the logistics, where they'd sleep, how this would work, whether he was making a terrible mistake. But he was also thinking about those bruises, about the way she'd said 5 years like it was a prison sentence, about the fact that she'd walked 10 miles in the freezing cold rather than stay wherever she'd been. "I'm asking if you're bringing trouble to my door," he said finally. The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Elena looked down at her sleeping baby, and when she looked back up, her face was open in a way it hadn't been before, open and honest and afraid. "I don't know," she said. "I hope not, but I don't know." It was the most honest answer she could have given. Jonah respected that, even as it complicated everything. "Where's the baby's father?" he asked. "Dead." The word came out flat, final. "As far as I know." "As far as you know?" I was told he was dead. I have reason to believe it might not be true. And if it's not true? Elena's hand moved to the baby's back, a protective gesture that was pure instinct. Then I need to be somewhere he can't find me. Jonah understood then, in the way that certain truths become clear all at once. The bruises, the fear, the willingness to walk 10 miles through snow rather than stay in town where records could be checked, questions could be asked. She wasn't just running from something. She was running from someone. I can't harbor a fugitive, Jonah said carefully. I'm not wanted for any crime. But he might be looking for you. Yes. And if he finds you here? Elena's eyes hardened. That's my problem, not yours. I'll handle it. I just need somewhere to be until... She stopped, seemed to reconsider. I just need somewhere to be. Jonah walked to the window and looked out at the darkness. Snow was falling in thick curtains now, erasing the world beyond his porch. By morning, the roads would be impassable. Even if he wanted to send her away, he couldn't. Not tonight. And the truth was, he wasn't sure he wanted to. The house had been so quiet for so long, so empty. Margaret had been dead for 7 years, and in that time Jonah had built walls around himself so high and thick that nothing could get through. He'd told himself it was better this way, safer. If you didn't let anyone in, they couldn't leave, they couldn't die. They couldn't break your heart into pieces so small you'd never find them all. But standing in his kitchen with this frightened woman and her baby, Jonah felt those walls crack just slightly, felt something warm seep through. It terrified him. I can give you 1 week, he said, turning back to face her. Trial period. You cook, clean, prove you can do what you say. I'll provide room and board. After a week, we talk about making it permanent. Relief flooded Elena's face, but she kept her voice steady. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I get up before dawn. I expect 3 meals a day, laundry done weekly, and the house kept clean. I'm not cruel, but I'm not easy either. This ranch runs on hard work. I'm not afraid of hard work. We'll see. Jonah gestured toward the hallway. There's a bedroom at the end of the hall. It's small, but it's warm. Stove heats most of the house. Washroom is the second door on the left. You'll find linens in the cupboard. Elena stood, shifting the baby carefully. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you start earning your keep, he paused. But tonight, you sleep. You look half dead. I feel half dead. It was the first hint of humor he'd heard from her, dry and dark as it was. Jonah almost smiled. Almost. Elena moved toward the hallway, then stopped. Mr. Hale. Just Hale. Or Jonah. Jonah. She turned to look at him, her gray eyes serious. I meant what I said. Lucas and I won't be any trouble. Whatever comes, I'll handle it. I won't let it touch you. Jonah wanted to believe her. But he'd lived long enough to know that trouble didn't care about promises. Trouble came whether you invited it or not, whether you were ready or not. Just get some sleep, Elena. She nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Jonah heard the bedroom door close, heard the soft murmur of her voice talking to the baby. Then silence. He stood alone in his kitchen, listening to the wind howl outside and wondered what the hell he'd just done. The first light of dawn came gray and cold. Jonah woke at 5, as he always did, and lay for a moment in the darkness of his bedroom, listening. The house made its familiar sounds, the creak of wood contracting in the cold, the tick of the cooling stove, the whisper of wind under the eaves. But there was something else, something new, a soft cooing sound from down the hall. The baby. Jonah rose and dressed in the dark, pulling on work pants and a heavy shirt, thick socks, and his boots. He'd slept poorly, his mind churning through all the ways this could go wrong. A woman and baby in his house. Possible trouble following them. The complications of having people dependent on him again when he'd sworn he'd never let himself care about anyone. He moved quietly down the hallway, intending to go straight to the kitchen, but he paused outside Elena's closed door. He could hear her moving around inside, could hear her murmuring to Lucas in a voice too soft to make out words. In the kitchen, he built up the fire in the stove and put coffee on to brew. While it heated, he went outside to check on the animals. 3 horses in the barn, a dozen chickens in their coop, 2 cows in the small shelter he'd built them. Everything was fine, buttoned down against the cold. When he came back inside, stomping snow from his boots, Elena was in the kitchen. She changed into a different dress, still worn, but clean, and had tied her dark hair back from her face. The baby was secured against her chest with a long piece of cloth wrapped and knotted in a way that left her hands free. Lucas gazed out at the world with those watchful eyes, apparently content. Elena was standing at the stove, staring at the coffee pot like she was trying to decode a foreign language. "Morning," Jonah said. She jumped, one hand flying to her chest. "I didn't hear you come in." "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine." She took a breath, seemed to steady herself. "I thought I'd start breakfast, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to presume." "Elena!" Jonah crossed to the cupboard and pulled down 2 cups. "You're the cook now. You don't need permission to use the kitchen." "Right, of course." She looked around, taking in the space with new eyes. The shelves of dry goods, the cold box where he kept things fresh, the pots and pans hanging from hooks. "What do you normally eat?" "Whatever's easy. Eggs if the hens are laying, oatmeal, bread. I can do better than that. I'm not looking for fancy." "I didn't say fancy, I said better." There was a hint of steel in her voice that Jonah found himself liking. He poured coffee for both of them and sat at the table, watching as she moved around the kitchen. She was methodical, opening cupboards and drawers, checking supplies, getting a sense of what she had to work with. The baby moved with her, apparently accustomed to being carried this way. "How old is he?" Jonah asked. 6 months? Almost 7. He's quiet. He's learned to be. There was something sad in the way she said it, something that suggested quietness hadn't been Lucas's choice. Elena found eggs, flour, a bit of bacon, some milk. She worked with confident, economical movements, someone who'd done this thousands of times. Within 20 minutes, the smell of cooking bacon filled the kitchen, followed by the warm scent of fresh biscuits. Jonah sipped his coffee and watched. It had been 7 years since he'd seen anyone cook in this kitchen besides himself. 7 years since the space had felt like anything other than a necessary room in an empty house. Margaret had loved to cook. She'd sing while she worked, off-key but joyful, and the kitchen had always been full of light and warmth and the smell of good things baking. After she and the baby both died, Jonah couldn't stand to be in here. For months, he'd barely eaten, living on hardtack and jerky like he was out on the range instead of in his own home. Eventually, necessity had forced him back in. He'd learned to cook the basics, enough to keep himself alive, but he'd never learned to make the kitchen feel like anything other than a functional space. Elena worked in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the quiet of concentration, of someone engaged in work they knew how to do well. She scrambled eggs with butter and herbs she found in his cupboard, rosemary that he'd forgotten was there. She fried the bacon until it was crispy. The biscuits came out golden and perfect. She set a plate in front of him that looked better than anything he'd eaten in years. "Thank you," Jonah said. Elena nodded and made herself a smaller plate, then sat across from him. She ate one-handed, the other hand supporting the baby. Lucas had fallen asleep, his small face peaceful against her chest. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The food was excellent. The eggs fluffy and flavorful, the bacon perfectly cooked, the biscuits tender and buttery. "This is good," Jonah said finally. "Thank you." Elena glanced at him, then away. "I'll make a list of things we're running low on. If you're planning a trip to town, I go once a month. Went 2 weeks ago." "Oh." She looked disappointed. "Well, I can make do with what's here." "You need something specific?" "No, it's fine." But Jonah had heard the hesitation. "What is it?" Elena bit her lip. "Lucas will need, that is, babies need certain things. Clean cloths, mostly. Mine are wearing thin, and he's growing fast. He'll need different clothes soon." She said it quickly, defensively. "But it can wait. We'll be fine." Jonah thought about the 10 miles she'd walked in the snow, about the worn dress and the thin coat, about the way she'd said, "I don't ask for wages," like wages were a luxury she couldn't afford to demand. "I'll make a list too," he said. "We'll combine them. I can go to town tomorrow if the roads are clear." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm offering." Elena looked at him for a long moment, something uncertain in her expression, like she was trying to figure out what the catch was, what he wanted in return. "Thank you," she said finally. After breakfast, Jonah showed her the rest of the house. It wasn't large. Kitchen, sitting room, 3 bedrooms, a washroom he'd had built a few years back with actual plumbing, a luxury out here. The house was sturdy, well built, but it bore the marks of 7 years of a single man's habitation. Dust in corners, curtains that needed washing, an overall air of functionality without warmth. "You can change things if you want," Jonah said. "Move furniture, wash curtains, whatever makes sense. Just don't throw anything away without asking." Elena walked through the rooms with that same careful attention she'd given the kitchen. In the sitting room, she paused in front of the mantel. There was a single photograph there in a silver frame, a wedding photo. Jonah and Margaret, both young, both smiling, the whole future spread out before them like a promise. Elena didn't touch it, didn't ask questions. She just looked at it for a moment, then moved on. They ended up back in the kitchen. Lucas was awake now, making small noises that suggested he'd be hungry soon. "I should feed him," Elena said. "Use the bedroom. Take your time." She disappeared down the hall, and Jonah was left alone with his thoughts and the lingering smell of breakfast. He washed the dishes, then went outside to start on the day's work. The ranch demanded constant attention, even in winter. Fences to check, animals to feed and water, firewood to split and stack, equipment to maintain. It was endless, the kind of work that could fill every hour of every day if you let it. Jonah had been letting it. For 7 years, work had been his salvation and his prison. It kept him busy, kept him from thinking too much, kept him from dwelling on everything he'd lost. But it also kept him isolated, kept him from having to feel anything beyond simple physical exhaustion. He was splitting wood when Elena emerged from the house an hour later. She'd bundled Lucas against the cold and stood on the porch, watching Jonah work. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she called. Jonah sank the axe into the chopping block and walked over to the porch. "You're the cook, not the ranch hand." "I can do more than cook." "I'm sure you can, but today just get settled. Learn where things are. Make dinner. That's enough." Elena looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. "What time do you want dinner? 6, maybe 7? Depends on how the work goes." "I'll make it for 6 and keep it warm." Jonah nodded and went back to the wood. He worked for another hour, aware of Elena watching from the window occasionally. Around noon, she brought him lunch, thick sandwiches and hot coffee. He ate on the porch, the cold air clearing his head. The afternoon passed in hard, simple labor. By the time dusk started to fall, Jonah was pleasantly exhausted, his muscles aching in that good way that came from useful work. He put away his tools and headed back to the house. Light glowed in the kitchen windows, warm and inviting. Smoke curled from the chimney. For just a moment, coming up the path, Jonah could almost pretend that time had folded back on itself, that Margaret was inside waiting for him, that the past 7 years had been nothing but a bad dream. Then he stepped inside and saw Elena at the stove, saw Lucas in a basket on the floor, and remembered. This wasn't his wife. This wasn't his life returned to him. This was something else entirely. Dinner was beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread. The stew was rich and savory, the kind of meal that warmed you from the inside out. Jonah ate 2 bowls. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "My mother." Elena broke off a piece of bread. "She was very particular about things being done right." "She teach you anything else?" "How to keep a house, how to manage money, how to—" She trailed off, something dark crossing her face. "How to keep peace." The way she said it made Jonah think keeping peace meant something more than mediating arguments. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Dead, 5 years ago. Fever." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She had a hard life. She's better off." It was a strange way to talk about a mother, but Jonah didn't push. Everyone had their own relationship with grief, their own way of processing loss. They finished dinner in silence. Elena cleared the plates and washed up, while Jonah sat at the table, drinking coffee, feeling more content than he had any right to be. Lucas started fussing, and Elena picked him up, bouncing him gently. "I should put him down. He's tired." "Go ahead." She disappeared down the hall. Jonah heard her moving around in the bedroom, heard her singing softly, a lullaby he didn't recognize. The sound did something strange to his chest, made it ache in a way that was almost pleasurable. When Elena came back, Lucas was presumably asleep. She poured herself coffee and sat down at the table, and for a while they just sat there, two people at the end of a long day, comfortable in the quiet. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said finally. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Why did you hire me?" Jonah considered the question. "Needed a cook." "You could have turned me away. You almost did. I saw it in your face, but you didn't." He'd thought about this himself all through the day. Why had he let her in? It would have been easier to send her back to town, to let someone else deal with whatever trouble she was carrying. "The baby," he said finally, his eyes. Elena waited, sensing there was more. "They reminded me of someone," Jonah continued. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain that they reminded him of the child he'd never gotten to meet, the son or daughter who'd died with Margaret. Figured maybe that was a sign. A sign of what? That I shouldn't be alone anymore. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Jonah hadn't realized that was what he'd been thinking until he said it out loud. Elena looked down at her coffee cup. "I'll try to make sure you don't regret it. Just cook and keep the house. That's all I'm asking." But they both knew it wasn't, really. By letting her stay, Jonah had opened a door he'd kept locked for 7 years, and neither of them knew yet what would come through it. 3 days passed. They fell into a rhythm surprisingly quickly. Jonah rose before dawn and went out to work. Elena cooked breakfast, cleaned the house, cared for Lucas, and prepared meals that got better each day. In the evenings, they'd eat dinner together, exchange a few words, then retreat to their separate spaces. It was a functional arrangement, professional, almost. But small things were changing. Elena had washed the curtains and hung them back up, bringing light into rooms that had been dim. She'd rearranged the kitchen so things made more sense, made the space more efficient. She'd found an old quilt in the linen closet and hung it on the wall in the sitting room, adding color to the space. Jonah noticed these things but didn't comment. He was aware, though, that the house felt different, lived in, like a home instead of just a shelter. On the third evening after dinner, Elena was washing dishes when she gasped and dropped a plate. It shattered on the floor. Jonah looked up from his coffee. Elena had gone pale, staring out the window over the sink. "What is it?" he asked. "I thought I saw—" She stopped, shook her head. "Nothing. I'm sorry about the plate." But Jonah had already stood and moved to the window. Outside, dusk was falling. The yard was empty, the barn dark. Nothing moved except the wind stirring the snow. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "A man. I thought, but it was probably just shadows." Jonah didn't think it was shadows. He'd heard something in her voice, recognized the fear underneath the words. "Stay here," he said. He grabbed his rifle and went outside. The cold hit him immediately, but he ignored it, moving across the yard with purpose. He checked the barn, empty except for the horses. The chicken coop, undisturbed. The tree line beyond the clearing, dark and still. No tracks in the snow except his own from the day's work. Jonah stood in the yard for a long time, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness, watching for any movement. But there was nothing. If someone had been there, they were gone now. When he came back inside, Elena was sweeping up the broken plate. Her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I'm being foolish." "You see anyone out there before?" "No, but I keep thinking—" She stopped, set down the broom. "I keep thinking he might have found me." "Your husband?" "Yes." Jonah set the rifle by the door and sat down at the table. "Tell me about him." Elena stiffened. "Why?" "Because if he's coming, I need to know what I'm dealing with." For a moment he thought she'd refuse, but then she sat down across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and started talking. "His name is Thomas Ward. We married when I was 19. I didn't know— He seemed kind at first, attentive. But after the wedding—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He had rules about how I should dress, how I should speak, where I could go. If I broke the rules, there were consequences." The bruises, Jonah thought. The flinching at sudden sounds. "When I got pregnant," Elena continued, I thought maybe it would change things, but it got worse. He didn't want the baby, said it would take my attention away from him. When Lucas was born, Thomas barely looked at him. But you said he was dead. 6 months ago, there was a fire. The house we lived in burned down. They told me Thomas was inside. They said they found... Her voice broke. They found a body, burned beyond recognition, but his size, his clothes, everyone assumed it was him. But you don't think so. I want to think so. But Thomas was smart, and he was cruel. If he wanted to disappear, to make everyone think he was dead... She looked up at Jonah, her eyes haunted. I keep waiting for him to appear, to take Lucas, to take me back. You think he'd come all the way out here? If he knew I was here, yes. Thomas doesn't let go of things that are his. And he always said I belonged to him. Jonah absorbed this, feeling anger build in his chest. He'd known men like Thomas Ward, men who confused love with ownership, who used their strength to control instead of protect. If he comes, Jonah said slowly, he'll have to go through me. Elena's eyes widened. I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm telling you. You're under my roof now. That means something. But you barely know me. I know enough. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Finally, Elena spoke. Why are you doing this? Really? Jonah thought about his answer. He could tell her it was the right thing to do, or that he needed a cook, or any number of practical reasons. But sitting here with her, in this kitchen that felt alive again for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to be honest. 7 years ago, he said, my wife Margaret died. She was pregnant, due any day. Something went wrong. By the time I got her to the doctor, it was too late. Lost them both in the same hour. Elena's face softened with understanding. I'm so sorry. I shut down after that. Shut everyone out. Told myself it was better to be alone, to not care, to not risk feeling that kind of pain again. Jonah looked at her steadily. But I was wrong. Being alone doesn't protect you from pain. It just means you face it by yourself. And Lucas and I, we're not replacements for what you lost. No, you're something different, something new. He paused. Maybe something I need, even if I didn't know it. Elena wiped at her eyes quickly. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for trusting me enough to stay. They sat together in the warm kitchen while darkness settled over the ranch outside. And for the first time in 7 years, Jonah Hale didn't feel quite so alone. That night, Jonah couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling, thinking about Thomas Ward, thinking about a man cruel enough to beat his wife, indifferent enough to ignore his own child, smart enough to fake his own death. If Ward was alive, if he was looking for Elena, he'd eventually find her. A small town like theirs kept few secrets. Someone would have noticed a young widow with a baby. Someone would talk. Jonah rose and dressed, then walked quietly through the dark house. He paused outside Elena's door. No sound from within. She and Lucas were presumably asleep. In the sitting room, he stood in front of the mantel and looked at the photograph of Margaret. She'd been so young in that picture, so full of life and hope. If she could see him now, what would she think? Would she approve of him taking in this stranger and her baby? Or would she think he was trying to replace her? But even as he thought it, Jonah knew that wasn't true. Elena wasn't a replacement. She was just a person who needed help. And maybe, just maybe, she was the thing that could help him find his way back to being human again. He thought about what Elena had said, about Thomas Ward not letting go of things that were his. Jonah understood that kind of possessiveness, but from the opposite direction. He'd let Margaret go because he'd had no choice. Death had taken her, and no amount of will or rage could bring her back. He'd learned to live with that loss, even if living was a generous term for what he'd been doing. But the thought of someone hunting Elena, of someone wanting to drag her back to a life of fear and pain, that ignited something in him. Something protective and fierce. He went to the drawer where he kept his gun oil and cleaning supplies. Methodically, he cleaned both his rifles and his pistol, checking mechanisms, counting ammunition. He wasn't a violent man by nature, but he'd fought in the war, knew how to defend himself and his property. If Thomas Ward came to his ranch, Jonah would be ready. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, Jonah finally went back to bed. He slept for 2 hours, dreamless and deep. When he woke, he could smell coffee brewing and bacon frying. Some things, he thought, were worth protecting. He got up and started another day. Part 2. Louis. Viet 6000, 6500, tu lien ket lien muk, vikek fun truk chunko, the rhythm they'd established, lasted exactly 9 days. On the morning of the 10th day, Jonah was in the barn checking on a mare who'd been favoring her left foreleg when he heard the sound of hooves on frozen ground. 3 riders, moving at a steady pace up the road toward his ranch. He set down the hoof pick and moved to the barn door, watching as the men approached. They weren't riding hard, weren't acting threatening, but something about the way they moved, loose in the saddle, eyes scanning everything, set off alarms in Jonah's head. These weren't neighbors coming to visit. These were men looking for something, or someone. Jonah walked out to meet them, keeping his hands visible but positioning himself between the riders and the house. Through the kitchen window, he could see Elena's silhouette pause, watching. The lead rider was a heavy-set man in his 40s with a thick beard and small, calculating eyes. He pulled his horse to a stop about 10 feet from Jonah and touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was more mockery than courtesy. "Morning," the man said. His voice was rough, like gravel rolling in a barrel. "Morning," Jonah replied, his tone neutral. "Help you with something?" "Maybe. Name's Pike. These are my associates, Daniels and Turner." He gestured to the 2 men flanking him, one tall and thin as a rail, the other younger, barely out of his teens but with hard eyes that had seen too much. "We're looking for someone. Thought maybe you could help us out." "I'm pretty isolated out here, don't see many people." Pike smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "That's funny, because word in town is you recently hired yourself a cook. Young woman, dark hair, traveling with a baby." Jonah's expression didn't change, but inside his mind was racing. Someone in town had talked. Of course they had. A widow with a baby showing up alone, getting hired by the hermit rancher. That was exactly the kind of gossip that spread like wildfire in a small community. "I did hire a cook," Jonah said carefully. "What's your interest?" "We're looking for a woman named Elena Ward. She's got dark hair, late 20s, traveling with an infant. Her husband is very worried about her." "Her husband?" "That's right, Thomas Ward. Good man, from what we hear. His wife took off with his baby about 6 months back. He's been searching for her ever since. You can imagine how torn up he is." Jonah could imagine exactly how torn up Thomas Ward was, but not for the reasons Pike was suggesting. "If I had information about this woman," Jonah said slowly, "why would I share it with 3 strangers on horseback instead of the sheriff?" Pike's smile widened. "Because we're working with the husband directly. More efficient that way. And Mr. Ward is prepared to offer a reward for information leading to the return of his wife and child." "How much?" $200. It was a substantial sum, enough to tempt most people. Pike was watching Jonah carefully, gauging his reaction. "That's generous," Jonah said. "Mr. Ward is a generous man. He just wants his family back." Behind Pike, the younger man, Turner, shifted in his saddle, his eyes drifting toward the house. Jonah noticed the gun on his hip, worn low and easy. These men weren't just hired help, they were hired guns. "I appreciate you riding all the way out here," Jonah said, keeping his voice level, "but I can't help you." Pike's expression hardened slightly. "You saying you don't have a cook?" "I'm saying even if I did, I wouldn't discuss my employees with strangers. Now, I've got work to do. I'll wish you gentlemen a good day." He turned to walk back toward the barn, deliberately presenting his back, a calculated risk. If they were going to make a move, this would be when. "Mr. Hale." Jonah stopped, didn't turn around. "You seem like a reasonable man," Pike continued. "Smart. I'd hate to think you were harboring someone who doesn't want to be found. That could lead to all kinds of complications." Now Jonah did turn, slowly. "Is that a threat?" "Just an observation. This is a remote ranch, long way from help if something were to happen. Fire, accident, robbery. Terrible things can happen when you're this isolated." The thin man, Daniels, grinned at that, showing crooked teeth. Jonah walked back toward the riders, moving with deliberate calm. He stopped a few feet from Pike's horse and looked up at the man with eyes that had gone cold and flat. "Let me make something clear," he said quietly. "This is my land. You're on it uninvited. I've answered your questions as courteously as I'm inclined to. Now I'm telling you to leave. If you're not off my property in the next 2 minutes, I'll consider you trespassers and act accordingly." Pike held his gaze for a long moment. The tension stretched taut between them, like a wire about to snap. Then Pike laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Fair enough, Mr. Hale. We'll be on our way." He started to turn his horse, then paused. "But we'll be in the area for a while, asking questions, following leads. If you remember anything that might help us, you know where to find us. We're staying at the boarding house in town." "I'll keep that in mind." Jonah watched as the three men rode away, waiting until they disappeared down the road before he allowed himself to move. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding hard against his ribs. He turned and walked quickly back to the house. Elena was standing just inside the kitchen door, her face drained of all color. Lucas was in her arms, awake and fussing. "They're looking for you," Jonah said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. "They said your husband hired them." "Then he's alive." Elena's legs seemed to give out. She sank into the nearest chair, clutching Lucas tightly. "I knew it. I knew he wasn't dead." Jonah pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Tell me everything, right now. No more half-truths." Elena's hands shook as she tried to calm Lucas, who was crying now, picking up on her fear. She took a breath, then started talking. "The fire was deliberate. Thomas said it. I know because he told me he was going to do it. Said he was tired of the life we had. Tired of being poor, tired of being nobody. He had debts, bad debts to dangerous people. The fire was his way out. He wanted people to think he was dead." "Yes. He told me to take Lucas and leave, to go to his brother's place in Wyoming. Said he'd meet us there once things settled down, but I couldn't—" Her voice broke. "I couldn't go back to that life, to him. So I ran." "Where did you go?" "I had some money my mother left me, hidden where he didn't know about it. I went east first, stayed in boarding houses, kept moving. But the money ran out, and I was tired of running. I thought if I came here, to a small town where nobody knew me, I could disappear, start over." Jonah absorbed this, piecing together the timeline. "How long before he figured out you weren't in Wyoming?" "I don't know, maybe a month, maybe longer. His brother would have sent word. Thomas would have been angry. Angry enough to send 3 hired guns after you." Elena's face crumpled. "I should leave. Tonight. I'll pack our things and go. I won't bring this to your door." "Too late for that. They've already connected you to this ranch." "Then I'll tell them I was here, but I left. Elena." Jonah reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond the accidental brush of fingers passing dishes. Her skin was cold. "Listen to me. Those men aren't going to stop looking. And if you run now, alone with a baby in the middle of winter, you won't make it far." "Then what do I do?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I can't let them take me back to him. I can't let him have Lucas." Jonah squeezed her hand once, then released it. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the empty yard. His mind was working through possibilities, contingencies, plans. "How long did they give you?" Elena asked quietly. "What?" "The men. How long before they come back?" "They didn't say, but they'll be watching, waiting to see if you bolt." Jonah turned to face her. "That's what they do. Flush the rabbit from the brush, see which way it runs." "I won't run. Not if it puts you in danger. You're already in danger. Question is whether we face it together or separately." Elena wiped her eyes, some steel returning to her spine. "Together? I told you before. You're under my roof. That means something." Jonah crossed back to the table. "We need a plan. First thing, you stay inside. Don't go anywhere near the windows where someone could see you from the road. Second, we need to know what we're dealing with. I'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to the sheriff. The sheriff won't help. Thomas will have papers, marriage certificate, claim to the baby. Legally, I'm his wife. Lucas is his son. Then we need different help. What kind of help? Jonah thought about the people he knew in town. He'd kept himself isolated for 7 years, but before Margaret died, he'd had friends. People who owed him favors. Maybe it was time to call some of them in. Let me handle that, he said. For now, you and Lucas stay hidden. If anyone comes to the door, you go to the bedroom and stay quiet. Understand? Elena nodded. Jonah, I'm sorry. I should have been more honest from the start. Maybe, but you're being honest now. That's what matters. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with something else, something warmer. Why are you doing this? Because it's right, and because... He stopped, unsure how to finish. Because? Because I watched you walk 10 miles through snow with a baby in your arms rather than give up. Anyone with that much courage deserves a chance. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she blinked them back. Thank you. Jonah nodded and moved toward the door. I'm going to check the property. Make sure they didn't leave anyone watching. Keep the doors locked. He spent the next 2 hours riding the perimeter of his land, looking for signs of surveillance. He found nothing, but that didn't mean much. If Pike and his men were smart, and they seemed smart, they'd be watching from a distance, using field glasses. When Jonah returned to the house, the sun was high and pale in the winter sky. Inside, Elena had made lunch, though neither of them had much appetite. They ate in tense silence, both aware that the fragile peace they'd built over the past 10 days had shattered. After lunch, while Elena put Lucas down for his nap, Jonah went to his study, a small room off the sitting area that he rarely used anymore. He pulled out paper and a pen and began making a list. Names, resources, people who might help. At the top of the list he wrote, James Corrigan. Corrigan had been a friend before Margaret died. A lawyer, one of the few honest ones Jonah had met. He'd helped Jonah with the purchase of additional land, had drawn up his will, had been one of the pallbearers at Margaret's funeral. They drifted apart after that, Jonah's doing, not Corrigan's, but the man had always said if Jonah ever needed anything, he only had to ask. Well, now Jonah needed something. He was still writing when Elena appeared in the doorway. He's asleep, she said quietly. Jonah set down his pen. Come in, sit. She entered the small room, looking around with curiosity. It was the one space in the house she hadn't cleaned or reorganized, Jonah's private domain. Books lined one wall, mostly agricultural texts and livestock guides. His desk was cluttered with papers, receipts, records of cattle sales and equipment purchases. Elena sat in the chair across from the desk. What are you doing? Making a list of people who might be able to help. Help how? Legally. If Thomas has papers claiming you're his wife and Lucas is his child, we need to find a way to counter that. Prove abuse, maybe. Get a judge to invalidate the marriage or grant you protection. Elena's face was skeptical. Judges don't usually side with wives over husbands. Depends on the judge and the evidence. Jonah tapped his pen against the paper. Those bruises I saw when you first arrived, were they all from him? Yes. Anyone ever witness him hurting you? Elena thought for a moment. The neighbors. They must have heard us fighting, and there was a doctor once. I fell down the stairs. At least, that's what Thomas told him, but the doctor seemed suspicious. Do you remember the doctor's name? Morrison. Dr. Charles Morrison. He practiced in Clearwater where we lived. Jonah wrote that down. Anyone else? Thomas's mother. She lived with us for a year. She knew what he was like. She tried to intervene once and he... Elena stopped, her face going pale. He hit her. His own mother. She left the next day and never came back. Would she testify to that? I don't know. She was afraid of him. But maybe if she knew it could help me keep Lucas safe, maybe she would. Jonah added the mother's name to his list. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The problem was that gathering this evidence, building a legal case, could take weeks or months, and they had days at best. There's another option, Elena said quietly. What's that? I could give myself up. Tell them I'll go back to Thomas willingly if he promises to leave you alone. No. Jonah, I said no. He looked at her steadily. That's not an option. Ever. But if it comes down to your safety, then I'll deal with it. But I won't let you sacrifice yourself." Jonah's voice softened. "Elena, I know you're scared. I know this seems impossible. But running back to an abuser isn't the answer. It never is." She looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. "I'm so tired of being afraid." "Then let's stop being afraid and start being prepared." That evening, after dinner, Jonah taught Elena how to load and fire his pistol. They went out behind the barn where the sound wouldn't carry far, and he showed her the mechanics, how to check if it was loaded, how to aim, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. Elena's first shot went wide, the recoil startling her, but her second was better, and by the 10th shot, she was hitting the target, an old fence post, more often than not. "I don't want to kill anyone," she said, lowering the gun. "I don't want you to either, but I want you able to protect yourself and Lucas if it comes to that." She nodded, understanding. They practiced until the light failed, until Elena's hands were steady and sure on the weapon. That night, Jonas sat up late in the sitting room, the rifle across his knees, listening to the night sounds outside. Around midnight, he heard floorboards creak and looked up to see Elena standing in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No." She moved into the room and sat in the chair near the cold fireplace. "Too many thoughts." "I know the feeling." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, an owl called, hunting in the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Sure." "Your wife, Margaret, what was she like?" Jonah was quiet for a moment, surprised by the question but not offended. "She was kind, patient. She saw good in people even when they didn't deserve it." He smiled slightly, remembering. "She used to sing all the time. Terrible voice, completely tone deaf, but she didn't care. Said music wasn't about being perfect, it was about being joyful." "She sounds wonderful." "She was. We met at a church social, I know, a cliché, but I saw her across the room and just knew. We were married 6 months later." The smile faded. "We had 7 good years. Then complications with the pregnancy, and—" He stopped, the familiar ache settling in his chest. "I'm sorry," Elena said softly. "I shouldn't have asked." "No, it's okay. I don't talk about her much. Maybe I should more." Jonah looked at Elena in the dim lamplight. "What about you? Was there ever a time when when it was good?" Elena considered this. "At first, maybe. Or I thought it was good because I didn't know any different. My father died when I was young. My mother remarried a man who was cruel to her. I grew up thinking that's just how marriage was. Men controlled things, women endured. When Thomas asked me to marry him, he seemed gentler than my stepfather, less angry. I thought that was enough." "When did it change?" "About a month after the wedding. He started criticizing little things, how I cooked, how I dressed, who I talked to. Then the criticism turned to anger. Then the anger turned to—" She gestured at herself. "This. By the time I realized what I'd married into, I was trapped." "But you got out." "Because of Lucas. When I was pregnant, something changed in me. I realized I couldn't let my child grow up the way I did, thinking that fear and control were normal. So when the fire happened, when Thomas gave me that chance to run, I took it." Jonah nodded slowly. "That takes courage. Or desperation, I'm not sure which. Sometimes they're the same thing." Elena pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Do you think we have a chance of fighting this?" Jonah wanted to lie, wanted to give her false comfort, but she deserved honesty. "I don't know," he said, "but I know we have a better chance together than apart. And I know I'm not going to let those men take you without a fight. Even though it's not your fight? It became my fight the moment I opened my door." Elena's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We've got a long way to go." She stood, preparing to go back to bed, but she paused beside his chair and did something unexpected. She leaned down and kissed his cheek, soft and quick. "Good night, Jonah." "Good night, Elena." He listened to her footsteps retreat down the hallway, felt the lingering warmth where her lips had touched his skin. Something shifted in his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning, Jonah rode to town alone. Elena had argued against it, said it was too dangerous, that Pike and his men might be watching, but Jonah insisted. They needed information, needed help, and hiding wasn't going to solve anything. The ride took 2 hours through snow-covered country. The town, when he reached it, looked exactly as it always did. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church at one end, a saloon at the other. Jonah tied his horse outside the general store and went inside. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the store with her husband, looked up in surprise when he entered. "Jonah Hale, twice in 1 month. Should I be worried?" Despite everything, Jonah found himself smiling. Just needed to pick up some supplies. He made his purchases quickly: flour, sugar, coffee, and the things Elena had asked for. Baby cloths, soap, a small toy for Lucas. Mrs. Henderson rang up the items, her eyes curious, but her mouth, thankfully, closed. As she wrapped his purchases, Jonah said casually, "Heard there were some strangers in town, men asking questions." Mrs. Henderson's expression darkened. Pike and his gang. Nasty pieces of work, if you ask me. They've been bothering half the town, asking about some woman who supposedly passed through. What are people saying? Most people aren't saying anything. We don't care much for outsiders coming in and making demands. She lowered her voice. But between you and me, Jonah, if you know something about this woman they're looking for, you'd best be careful. Pike's got a mean reputation. They say he'll do anything for money. Thanks for the warning. Jonah left the store and walked down the street to a small office with a sign that read James Corrigan, attorney at law. He hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. 7 years was a long time to neglect a friendship. But he knocked anyway. "Come in." James Corrigan looked exactly as Jonah remembered, tall and thin, with prematurely gray hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing documents, but when he looked up and saw Jonah, his face broke into a genuine smile. Jonah Hale. Well, I'll be damned. He stood and came around the desk, extending his hand. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to find town." Jonah shook his hand. "Been busy with the ranch." "For 7 years?" Corrigan's tone was gentle, not accusatory. "Sit down. Tell me what brings you here." Jonah sat and laid out the situation as clearly as he could. Elena's arrival, her history with Thomas Ward, the hired men looking for her. As he talked, Corrigan listened with the focused attention of a man trained to hear what wasn't being said as well as what was. When Jonah finished, Corrigan leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "That's a hell of a situation. Can you help?" "Maybe. Legally, it's complicated. If Ward has a valid marriage certificate and can prove paternity of the child, he has rights, but—" Corrigan held up a hand. "Those rights can be challenged if there's evidence of abuse, abandonment, or endangerment. She has evidence. Witnesses who saw the abuse." "Written testimony?" "Not yet. We'll need it. Letters, affidavits, medical records if possible." Corrigan pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began making notes. "I'll need to interview Elena myself, get her full statement, and we'll need to move fast. If Pike finds her before we can get a court order of protection." "He won't find her." Corrigan looked at Jonah over his spectacles. "You're certain of that?" "Yes." "Jonah, these men are professionals. They're being paid to find her, and they're good at what they do." "Then they'll find me first, and that won't go well for them." Corrigan studied him for a long moment. "You've changed. Have I?" "The Jonah I knew 7 years ago wouldn't have gotten involved in something like this. Too much risk, too much complication. Maybe I was tired of being that Jonah." A slight smile touched Corrigan's lips. "I'm glad to hear it. You were never meant to live like a hermit." He returned his attention to his notes. "I'll draw up the necessary paperwork today. Bring Elena to town tomorrow. We'll use the back entrance. Keep it quiet. The less Pike knows about our moves, the better." "Thank you, James." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to be a fight." Corrigan set down his pen. "But for what it's worth, I'm glad you're fighting it. Elena Ward deserves better than what she's running from." Jonah left the office feeling slightly more hopeful. On his way back to his horse, he passed the boarding house where Pike and his men were supposedly staying. He saw no sign of them, but he felt eyes watching from somewhere. Let them watch, he thought. Let them see I'm not afraid. He rode home with his supplies, taking a longer route that allowed him to check if anyone was following. No one was, at least not obviously. When he arrived back at the ranch, Elena was waiting on the porch, relief flooding her face when she saw him. I was worried, she said. I'm fine, and I have good news. He carried the supplies inside and told her about his conversation with Corrigan. He wants to meet with you tomorrow. Can you do that? Yes, of course. Elena's hands twisted together nervously. Do you really think this can work? That we can fight Thomas legally? I think it's our best shot. Better than waiting for him to show up here. And if the legal route doesn't work? Jonah met her eyes steadily. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. That night, they prepared. Jonah cleaned all the guns again, counted ammunition, checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Elena packed a small bag with essentials for her and Lucas, just in case they needed to leave quickly. Around midnight, they sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, both too wired to sleep. I keep thinking about what happens after, Elena said quietly. After? After this is resolved, one way or another. What happens to Lucas and me? Jonah had been trying not to think about that. What do you want to happen? I want... She stopped, seemed to gather her courage. I want to stay, here, with you, if you'll have us. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Jonah felt his heart start to pound. Elena, I know it's complicated. I know we barely know each other, but these past days, being here, feeling safe for the first time in years, her voice broke slightly. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Jonah reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was warm now, no longer ice cold like that first night. You're not going to lose me, he said. Whatever happens, you and Lucas have a place here as long as you want it. I want it. I want... She stopped herself, shook her head. I'm sorry. This isn't the time for this conversation. When would be the time? Elena looked at him, something soft and vulnerable in her gray eyes. When we're not fighting for our lives, maybe? Jonah smiled despite everything. Fair enough. But he didn't let go of her hand, and she didn't pull away. They sat there in this quiet kitchen, fingers intertwined, drawing strength from each other. And for just a moment, the danger outside seemed far away. The moment shattered when they heard horses. They both froze, listening. Multiple riders, moving fast, coming up the road toward the ranch. Jonah was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. Get Lucas and go to the bedroom, he said. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you. Elena's face had gone pale, but she didn't argue. She disappeared down the hallway at a run. Jonah heard the bedroom door close, heard the lock slide home. He moved to the window and looked out. 4 riders this time, not 3. They pulled up in front of the house, their horses breathing hard from the fast ride. Pike was in the lead again, but now he was accompanied by a 4th man, older, well-dressed in a wool coat and expensive hat. Jonah's stomach dropped. He didn't need introductions to know who the 4th man was. The way he sat his horse, the proprietary air, the cold calculation in his eyes, even from this distance. Thomas Ward had come for his wife. Jonah checked his rifle one more time, then opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold air hit him like a slap, but he barely felt it. All his attention was focused on the men in front of him. Thomas Ward dismounted and walked forward, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. He was younger than Jonah had expected, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair and handsome features that would have seemed trustworthy if not for the cruelty in his eyes. Mr. Hale, Ward said, his voice smooth and cultured. Thank you for seeing me. I don't recall inviting you. Ward smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My apologies for the late hour, but I understand my wife is here and I've come to bring her home. Your wife? Yes, Elena Ward, and our son Lucas. Ward's expression turned concerned, the perfect picture of a worried husband. She's not well, Mr. Hale. Hasn't been since the baby was born. The doctor says it's a kind of melancholia that affects some women after childbirth. It makes them confused, irrational. She ran away thinking she was in danger, but it's all in her mind. It was a good story, believable, even sympathetic. Jonah could see how it would play to a jury, to a judge. That's interesting, Jonah said, because the woman I've been talking to seems perfectly rational to me. Ward's smile tightened. With respect, you're not a doctor. You don't know what signs to look for. I know what bruises look like. The smile disappeared entirely. I don't know what she's told you, but she didn't have to tell me anything. I have eyes. Jonah leveled the rifle, not quite pointing it at Ward, but making his intentions clear. Now I'm going to say this once. You and your men are going to get on your horses and leave my property. If you come back, I'll consider it trespassing and act accordingly. Ward's face hardened. She's my wife. I have every legal right. Legal rights can be disputed in court. On my land, with a gun in my hands, my rights are pretty clear. Behind Ward, Pike shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his weapon. Jonah swung the rifle toward him. I wouldn't, Jonah said quietly. Pike froze. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Ward held up a hand. Gentlemen, let's all stay calm. Mr. Hale, I understand you're trying to protect someone you think needs protecting. I respect that. But you're being lied to. Elena is mentally unwell. She needs help, medical help, not to be hidden away in a remote ranch. Then take it to the sheriff. Get a court order. Follow the law. I plan to. But I wanted to give you a chance to do the right thing before it comes to that. Ward's voice turned cold. Because once I involve the law, once I press charges for kidnapping and harboring a fugitive, this becomes much more complicated for you. Kidnapping? She came here of her own free will, according to you, but can you prove it? Do you have witnesses? Or is it just your word against mine, and I'm her legal husband with a legitimate claim? Jonah felt the trap closing around him. Ward was smarter than he'd anticipated, more calculating. This wasn't going to be resolved with guns. It was going to be resolved in courtrooms with lawyers and judges and laws that favored men like Ward. But that was a fight for tomorrow. Tonight, all Jonah had to do was keep them off his property. We're done talking, he said. Get off my land. Now! Ward stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted with easy grace, then looked back at Jonah. You're making a mistake, Mr. Hale. One you'll regret. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. This isn't one of them. Ward's jaw tightened. Then he turned his horse and rode away, Pike and the others following. Jonah stood on the porch, rifle ready, watching until they disappeared into the darkness. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He went back inside and locked the door, then walked to Elena's bedroom. They're gone, he called through the door. The lock clicked and the door opened. Elena stood there holding Lucas, her face streaked with tears. He was here, she whispered. Thomas was here. Yes. What did he say? Jonah told her, watching her face crumple as he explained Ward's story about post-birth melancholia. People will believe him, she said. He's always so convincing. Not everyone. Corrigan won't. The sheriff might not. We'll fight this, Elena. But what if sus? No what ifs. Not tonight. Jonah reached out and squeezed her shoulder. Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we fight. One step at a time. Elena nodded, but Jonah could see the fear in her eyes. And he understood it because he felt it too. Thomas Ward wasn't going to give up. He was going to come back, with lawyers or lawmen or worse. And when he did, Jonah would have to make a choice, follow the law and risk losing Elena, or break it and risk everything. But as he looked at her standing there with her baby, brave and terrified, and trusting him to keep her safe, Jonah realized the choice had already been made. He would protect them, whatever it took. The letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by a deputy Jonah had known since the man was a boy. Young Tommy Mitchell stood on the porch looking uncomfortable, his badge catching the pale morning light. Sorry about this, Mr. Hale, Tommy said, extending an official-looking envelope. Sheriff said I had to serve it personally. Jonah took the letter, his stomach sinking. What is it? Court summons. That fellow Ward filed a complaint. Says you're harboring his wife and child against their will. Tommy shifted his weight, not meeting Jonah's eyes. There's going to be a hearing day after tomorrow. Judge Matthews is presiding. Matthews? Jonah knew the name. An older judge, traditional, not known for his sympathy toward women who left their husbands. Yes, sir, you'll need to appear, and so will Mrs. Ward. Tommy finally looked up. Mr. Hale, is it true? Is she here? Jonah could have lied. Should have, maybe. But Tommy had always been honest, and he deserved honesty in return. She's here. Came looking for work. I hired her. And the baby? Hers. 6 months old. Tommy nodded slowly. Pike's been saying she's crazy, that she ran off with the baby and doesn't know what she's doing. Pike's a liar working for a man who beats his wife. The deputy's eyes widened slightly. You got proof of that? Working on it. Jonah folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. Tell the sheriff we'll be there. Both of us. After Tommy left, Jonah found Elena in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with fierce concentration. Lucas was asleep in his basket nearby, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. That was the deputy, Jonah said. Elena's hand stilled in the dough. They're coming for us. Not yet, but there's a hearing, day after tomorrow. Judge wants to hear Ward's complaint. She pulled her hands from the dough and wiped them on her apron, leaving white streaks. What kind of hearing? Custody, I imagine. Ward's claiming I'm keeping you here against your will. That's a lie. I know. You'll need to tell that to the judge. Jonah pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. James Corrigan will represent you. He's good, Elena. One of the best. But will it be enough? She sank into the chair across from him, her face pale. Thomas is convincing. He'll have documents, witnesses. He'll paint me as an unstable woman who kidnapped her own child. Then we'll paint him as what he really is, a man who terrorized his wife. Elena's laugh was bitter. You think a judge will care about that? Women get beaten by their husbands every day, Jonah. It's practically expected. As long as they don't die, nobody intervenes. She was right, and they both knew it. The law was designed to protect men's rights over their families, not to protect families from men. We have to try, Jonah said. What's the alternative? You run again? Maybe. Maybe I take Lucas and disappear for good this time. Where would you go? I don't know. West, maybe. California. Somewhere far enough that Thomas can't find us. Jonah felt something twist in his chest at the thought of her leaving. In less than 2 weeks, Elena and Lucas had become woven into the fabric of his daily life. The house felt alive again, full of purpose and warmth. The thought of going back to the cold silence of before was unbearable. I don't want you to go, he said quietly. Elena's eyes met his, something vulnerable and raw in their gray depths. I don't want to go either, but I won't let you lose everything because of me. What if I think you're worth losing everything for? The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Elena's breath caught. Jonah, I mean it. These past 2 weeks, having you here, having life in this house again. He stopped, struggling to find the right words. I was dead inside, Elena, just going through the motions. But you and Lucas, you reminded me what it feels like to care about something, someone. I'm not going to give that up without a fight. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. I care about you too. More than I should, probably. More than is smart. Since when has caring about someone been about being smart? She laughed through her tears, and Jonah found himself smiling despite everything. He reached across the table and took her hand, and this time when their fingers intertwined, it felt like a promise. We'll go to the hearing, he said. We'll tell the truth, and whatever happens, we'll face it together. Elena squeezed his hand. Together. The next day, Corrigan rode out to the ranch to prepare Elena for the hearing. He set up in Jonah's study, papers spread across the desk, and spent 3 hours taking her statement. Jonah waited in the kitchen, listening to the murmur of voices through the door, occasionally hearing Elena's voice crack with emotion. When they finally emerged, Elena looked exhausted but composed. Corrigan looked grimly determined. We have a case, the lawyer said, settling into a kitchen chair and accepting the coffee Jonah offered. Not a strong one, but a case nonetheless. Elena's testimony about the abuse is compelling. If we can get her in front of the judge, if she can speak clearly and calmly, we might have a chance. What about witnesses? Jonah asked. I've sent telegrams to Dr. Morrison in Clearwater and to Thomas Ward's mother. Morrison has agreed to provide a written statement about his suspicions regarding Elena's injuries. The mother hasn't responded yet. She won't, Elena said softly. She's too afraid of Thomas. Maybe, but I had to try. Corrigan pulled out another document. The problem we're facing is that Ward has legal standing. He's her husband. Lucas is his son. In the eyes of the law, they're his property. People aren't property, Jonah said sharply. In theory, no. In practice? Corrigan shrugged. The law sees it differently. Our best argument is that Ward abandoned Elena when he faked his death. That constitutes desertion, which could be grounds for dissolving the marriage. Elena leaned forward. But he'll say he was trying to escape his debts, that he planned to reunite with us. Yes, he will. It comes down to credibility. Who does the judge believe? Corrigan looked between them. I won't lie to you. Judge Matthews is old-fashioned. He believes in the sanctity of marriage, in keeping families together. He's not going to be sympathetic to a wife who ran away, no matter the reason. Then we're fighting a losing battle, Elena said. Not necessarily. If we can prove Ward is dangerous, that returning Elena and Lucas to him would put them in harm's way, Matthews might rule differently. It's a long shot, but it's possible. After Corrigan left, Jonah and Elena sat together in the gathering darkness. Lucas was fussing and Elena picked him up, rocking him gently. I keep thinking about what happens if we lose, she said. We won't. But if we do? If the judge orders me to go back to Thomas? She looked down at Lucas, her face full of fierce love. I won't do it. I'll run. I'll take Lucas and disappear, and you'll never see us again. The thought hit Jonah like a physical blow. Don't say that. I have to say it. You need to understand. I will not let that man raise my son. I will not let Lucas learn that violence and control are how you love someone. Her voice was steel. I'll die first, or I'll run so far and so deep that Thomas will never find us. Jonah stood and crossed to where she sat. He knelt beside her chair, looking up at her face. If you run, he said slowly, I'm coming with you. Elena's eyes widened. What? You heard me. If it comes to that, if the only choice is running, then we run together, you, me, and Lucas. Jonah, you can't. This ranch, your life, doesn't mean anything without you in it. The words came out raw, honest. I buried my heart with Margaret 7 years ago. I thought that was it, that I'd never feel anything again. But then you showed up half frozen on my porch, and something in me woke up. I'm not going back to sleep. I'm not going back to being alone. You'd give up everything? I'd give up everything for a chance at something real. Elena set Lucas down gently in his basket, then cupped Jonah's face in her hands. You're a good man, Jonah Hale. I'm a man who knows what matters. She leaned down and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and tasted like hope and desperation mixed together. When they pulled apart, both of them were trembling. Whatever happens tomorrow, Elena whispered, thank you for seeing me, for believing me, for making me feel like I'm worth saving. You are worth saving. You and Lucas both. They sat together on the floor, Lucas between them, until the baby fell asleep. Then Jonah carried Elena's boy to his basket and walked her to her bedroom door. They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to separate. Try to sleep, Jonah said. You too. But neither of them slept much that night. Jonah lay in his bed listening to the old house settle around him, thinking about courtrooms and judges and the very real possibility that tomorrow might tear apart the fragile peace they'd built. Dawn came cold and gray. They dressed in their best clothes, Jonah in a suit he hadn't worn since Margaret's funeral, Elena in a modest dress she'd mended and pressed until it looked almost new. She wrapped Lucas in clean blankets and held him close. The ride to town was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Corrigan met them at his office and went over the plan one more time. Then they walked together to the courthouse, a squat brick building that sat at the end of Main Street like a judge itself, stern and unyielding. Inside, the courtroom was already half full. Jonah saw Thomas Ward sitting at the front with his own lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Pike and his men sat in the back row, watching everything with cold eyes. Ward turned as they entered, and his gaze locked onto Elena. Even from across the room, Jonah could see the rage and possession in that look. Elena's hand tightened on his arm. "It's okay," Jonah murmured. "I'm right here." They took their seats. Corrigan arranged his papers. Lucas, blessedly, stayed quiet in Elena's arms, his watchful eyes taking in the strange new place. Judge Matthews entered, and everyone rose. He was an older man with white hair and a face carved from granite, wearing black robes that made him look like a crow. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes. "Be seated," he said, his voice surprisingly strong for his age. "We're here to consider a complaint filed by Mr. Thomas Ward regarding the custody of his wife, Elena Ward, and their infant son, Lucas Ward. Mr. Ward, your lawyer may proceed." Ward's lawyer stood, all polish and confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor. My client's case is straightforward. 6 months ago, his wife Elena Ward took their infant son and fled their home without warning or provocation. My client has been searching for them ever since, concerned for their welfare." "And what does Mr. Ward claim is the reason for her flight?" the judge asked. "Postpartum melancholia, Your Honor, a medical condition that affects some women after childbirth, causing confusion, paranoia, and irrational behavior. We have a doctor's statement attesting that Mrs. Ward showed signs of this condition." Corrigan was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. We've seen no such statement." "But it will be entered into evidence," Ward's lawyer said smoothly, producing a document. The judge took it, read it briefly, then set it aside. "Continue. My client recently learned that Mrs. Ward has been staying at the ranch of one Jonah Hale, a man she barely knows. Mr. Hale has refused to allow my client access to his wife and child, essentially holding them prisoner." "That's a lie," Jonah said, standing. The judge's eyes snapped to him. "Mr. Hale, you'll have your chance to speak. Sit down." Jonah sat, but his jaw was tight with anger. Beside him, Elena's face had gone pale. Ward's lawyer continued, painting a picture of a confused woman led astray by a lonely rancher with questionable motives. He made Elena sound weak and mentally unstable, made Jonah sound predatory and controlling. It was masterful, the way he twisted the truth into something ugly. When he finished, the judge turned to Corrigan. "Your response?" Corrigan stood, and Jonah saw the steel in the lawyer's spine. "Your Honor, the truth is much simpler and much darker than opposing counsel suggests. Elena Ward didn't flee due to mental illness. She fled to escape a husband who physically abused her for years." "That's slander!" Ward's lawyer shouted. "It's the truth, and we can prove it." Corrigan pulled out his own documents. "We have a statement from Dr. Charles Morrison of Clearwater, who treated Mrs. Ward on multiple occasions for injuries consistent with physical abuse. We have Mrs. Ward's own testimony about years of violence and intimidation." The judge took the documents and read them slowly. His expression didn't change. "Mrs. Ward," he said finally, looking at Elena. "Stand up." Elena stood, Lucas still in her arms. The baby had started to fuss, sensing her tension. "Is it true that you left your husband 6 months ago?" "Yes, Your Honor." Elena's voice was steady despite her pale face. "And is it true that you're currently residing at Mr. Hale's ranch?" "Yes." "Are you being held there against your will?" "No, Your Honor. I came to Mr. Hale's ranch seeking work. He hired me as his cook. I've stayed of my own free will." "And the allegations of abuse against your husband, are those true?" Elena's eyes found Thomas across the courtroom. He stared back at her with an expression that promised retribution. But Elena lifted her chin and spoke clearly. "Yes, Your Honor. My husband beat me regularly throughout our marriage. He controlled every aspect of my life. When I became pregnant, it got worse. After Lucas was born, Thomas barely acknowledged his existence. He said the baby was taking me away from him." "If this is true," the judge said, "why didn't you seek help? Go to the sheriff? Contact the authorities?" "Because I was afraid, Your Honor. Thomas always said if I told anyone, he'd kill me. I believed him." "Yet you had the courage to run away?" "I found courage when I looked at my son and realized I couldn't let him grow up watching his father hurt his mother. Children learn what they see, Your Honor. I couldn't let Lucas learn that violence is love." The courtroom was silent. Even Pike and his men seemed affected by the raw honesty in Elena's voice. But Ward's face had gone red with rage. "She's lying," he burst out, standing. "Every word is a lie." "Mr. Ward, sit down," the judge said sharply. "I never laid a hand on her. She's mentally ill, Your Honor, making up stories." "I said sit down!" Ward sat, but his hands were clenched into fists. Jonah watched him, saw the barely controlled violence beneath the civilized surface, and understood exactly what Elena had been living with. The judge turned back to Elena. "These injuries Dr. Morrison documented. How did you explain them?" "I told him I fell. It's what Thomas always told me to say." "And the doctor believed you?" "No, Your Honor, I could see it in his eyes. But he didn't press the issue." Judge Matthews sat back in his chair, his face thoughtful. "Mr. Hale, stand up." Jonah stood. "What's your interest in this case?" "Elena and Lucas needed help, Your Honor. I provided it." "Nothing more than that?" Jonah could have lied, could have kept it simple, professional. But he looked at Elena standing there with her son, and he couldn't. "I care about them," he said. "Both of them. I want to see them safe and happy. That's my interest." "Are you romantically involved with Mrs. Ward?" "Not in the way you're suggesting, Your Honor, but I won't deny that I have feelings for her." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Ward's lawyer seized on it immediately. "Your Honor, this proves my client's point. Mr. Hale has seduced a mentally unwell woman, taken advantage of her vulnerable state." "That's enough," the judge said. He looked at Elena. "Mrs. Ward, do you feel Mr. Hale has taken advantage of you?" "No, Your Honor. He's been nothing but kind and respectful. He gave me work when I needed it, shelter when I had nowhere else to go. He's asked nothing from me except honest work." "And your feelings toward him?" Elena's voice was clear and strong. "I respect him. I'm grateful to him. And yes, I care about him. He's shown me what kindness looks like, what it feels like to be valued rather than controlled." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'd like to see the baby." Elena hesitated, then walked forward and placed Lucas in the judge's arms. The old man looked down at the infant with an expression that might have been softness. Lucas, for his part, stared up at the judge with those same watchful eyes that had struck Jonah that first night. The baby didn't cry, didn't fuss. He just looked, as if measuring the man who held his fate. "He's a handsome child," the judge said finally, handing Lucas back to Elena. "Healthy?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you've cared for him alone these 6 months?" "Yes." Judge Matthews returned to his seat. "I'm going to hear from Mr. Ward now. Sir, stand up and tell me your side of this." Thomas Ward stood, and Jonah watched him transform. The rage disappeared, replaced by concern and sorrow. It was like watching an actor step into a role. "Your Honor," Ward said, his voice breaking slightly, "I love my wife. I love my son. When Elena left, I was devastated. I've spent every day since trying to find them, praying they were safe." "The allegations of abuse, are they false?" "Completely false, Your Honor. I never raised a hand to Elena. Never. We had disagreements, yes, like any married couple. But violence? Never." "Then how do you explain Dr. Morrison's statement?" "Elena was clumsy, Your Honor. She fell frequently during her pregnancy. I tried to help her, to take care of her, but she refused my help. As for her mental state, I noticed changes after the baby was born. She became paranoid, accused me of things I never did, withdrew from me. I wanted to get her help, but she ran before I could. It was smooth, practiced, believable. Jonah felt sick listening to it." "And the fire that supposedly killed you?" the judge asked. Ward's face showed perfect surprise. "I don't know what you mean, Your Honor." "Records show a fire destroyed your home 6 months ago. A body was found, identified as you." "That was a terrible mistake, Your Honor. I was away on business when the fire happened. A vagrant had broken into the house, apparently. When I returned and saw the devastation, saw that Elena and Lucas were gone, I assumed the worst. It took weeks to sort out the confusion." "Yet you didn't report your wife and child missing?" I hoped, Elena had gone to family. It wasn't until I checked with her relatives that I realized she'd simply run." Another murmur through the courtroom. "Ward was good," Jonah had to admit. "Very good." Corrigan stood. Your Honor, permission to cross-examine. Granted. Corrigan approached Ward like a circling wolf. Mr. Ward, you claim you never struck your wife, yet we have medical records documenting injuries consistent with repeated physical trauma. As I explained, she was clumsy. Clumsy enough to fracture her wrist, to bruise her ribs, to receive a concussion. She had difficult pregnancies. Her pregnancy ended 7 months ago, yet Dr. Morrison's most recent documentation of injuries was from 3 weeks before she left you. Was she still pregnant then? Ward's smooth facade cracked slightly. I don't recall the exact timeline. Convenient. Corrigan pulled out another document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a statement from Clara Ward, the defendant's mother, who lived with the couple for 1 year. Ward's face went white. My mother is elderly, confused. She's 62 and in perfect mental health, Corrigan said, and she states clearly that she witnessed her son strike his wife on multiple occasions. She left the household after he struck her as well for trying to intervene. That's a lie. Is it? Then why haven't we seen your mother here today supporting you? The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. Order! I'll have order! When the room quieted, he looked at Ward. Mr. Ward, is your mother's statement accurate? Ward's composure was completely gone now, replaced by barely contained rage. My mother and I had a disagreement. She's bitter, trying to hurt me. By telling the truth? Corrigan pressed. Your Honor, we also have testimony from 3 neighbors who heard arguments, crashes, and a woman screaming from the Ward household on multiple occasions. They're lying, all of them, Ward's voice rose. This is a conspiracy, Your Honor. My wife has turned everyone against me. And there it was. The real Thomas Ward, the one Elena had been living with. The mask had slipped, revealing the rage underneath. Judge Matthews watched Ward carefully. Mr. Ward, sit down and control yourself. Ward sat, but his hands were shaking with fury. He stared at Elena with such hatred that Jonah instinctively moved closer to her. The judge reviewed his notes in silence. The entire courtroom held its breath. Finally, Matthews looked up. This is a difficult case, he said. On one hand, we have a legal marriage and a father's right to his child. On the other hand, we have concerning evidence of potential abuse and a mother's right to protect her son. Elena's hand found Jonah's, squeezing tight. However, the judge continued, I cannot ignore the weight of evidence presented by Mrs. Ward's counsel. Dr. Morrison's statement is particularly damning. Combined with the testimony from Mrs. Clara Ward and the neighbors, I find it more likely than not that Mr. Thomas Ward did indeed abuse his wife. Your Honor, Ward's lawyer started, I'm not finished. Given these findings, I'm issuing a temporary order of protection. Mrs. Elena Ward and her son Lucas are to remain in Mr. Hale's custody pending a full custody hearing, which I'm scheduling for 3 months from now. During this time, Mr. Ward is prohibited from approaching, contacting, or attempting to communicate with his wife or child. Relief flooded through Jonah, so intense it was almost painful. Beside him, Elena made a small sound, half sob, half laugh. This is outrageous, Ward shouted, on his feet again. She's my wife. That's my son. Mr. Ward, if you continue to disrupt these proceedings, I'll hold you in contempt. You can't do this. I have rights. And so does she. So does that child. The judge's voice was steel. Your behavior in this courtroom today has only reinforced my decision. A man who truly cares for his wife and child would show restraint, respect. You've shown nothing but rage and entitlement. Ward's face was purple with fury. This isn't over. I'll appeal. You'll do nothing that violates my order, or you'll find yourself in jail. Is that clear? Ward didn't answer, just stared at the judge with barely suppressed violence. Court is adjourned. We'll reconvene in 3 months. Matthews banged his gavel. As people started to file out, Jonah turned to Elena. She was crying, clutching Lucas to her chest. We won, she whispered. We actually won. For now, Corrigan cautioned, joining them. 3 months isn't permanent, but it's time. Time to build a stronger case. Time to gather more evidence. It's enough, Elena said. It's more than I hoped for. They started toward the exit, but Ward stepped into their path. Pike and his men moved up behind him, forming a wall of menace. This isn't over, Ward said, his voice low and dangerous. He looked at Elena with pure hatred. You're still my wife. That's still my son. And one way or another, I'm taking back what's mine. Jonah stepped between them. You heard the judge. Stay away from them. Or what? You'll protect them? Ward laughed, a harsh sound. You're nothing, a washed-up rancher playing hero. When I come back, and I will come back, you won't be able to stop me. Try it, Jonah said quietly. Please, try it. For a moment they stood there, two men on the edge of violence. Then Corrigan stepped between them. Gentlemen, this is still a courthouse. I suggest we all leave peacefully. Ward stared at Jonah for another long moment, then turned and stalked away, his men following. But at the door, he looked back one more time, and the promise in his eyes was clear. This was far from over. Outside, the winter air felt clean and cold after the stuffiness of the courtroom. Elena was still crying, but now there was relief mixed with the fear. Thank you, she said to Corrigan. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. We still have a fight ahead of us. The lawyer looked at Jonah. Keep her safe. Ward's not going to accept this decision quietly. I know. They said their goodbyes and climbed into Jonah's wagon for the ride home. As they left town, Jonah noticed Pike watching from the saloon window, his eyes tracking their departure. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Lucas had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day. Elena held him close, her eyes distant. What are you thinking? Jonah asked. That we have 3 months. 3 months to figure out how to make this permanent. She looked at him. 3 months before Thomas comes back. Then we use those 3 months well. We gather evidence, we build our case, we prepare. And if it's not enough? Jonah thought about his earlier promise, about running if they had to. But he didn't want to run. This was his land, his home, and now it was their home too. Then we make it enough, he said. Whatever it takes. Elena reached over and took his hand. They rode the rest of the way home like that, fingers intertwined, facing an uncertain future together. When they arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. The house looked solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney where Jonah had banked the fire that morning. Inside, Elena put Lucas down for the night, then came back to the kitchen where Jonah was making coffee. I keep waiting for the relief to hit, she said. But all I feel is dread, like this is just the calm before the storm. Maybe it is, Jonah said, but we'll weather the storm. We've come this far. Elena moved closer to him, and Jonah set down his coffee cup. She looked up at him with those gray eyes, now filled with something warm and grateful and deeper than simple appreciation. When I walked up to your door that first night, she said softly, I thought I was just looking for shelter, a job, a place to hide. I never expected to find... She stopped, struggling with the words. To find what? Home. Hope. You. Jonah cupped her face gently. I never expected to find you either, never expected to feel anything again, but here we are. Here we are, she echoed. He kissed her then, properly this time, not the desperate kiss of the night before, but something slower, deeper, full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were trembling. 3 months, Elena whispered. We have 3 months to figure out how to keep this. Keep us. Then we'll make them count. They stood together in the kitchen, holding each other as darkness fell outside and the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the house. Somewhere out there, Thomas Ward was planning his next move, plotting how to take back what he considered his property. But in this moment, in this house, Elena and Lucas were safe, and Jonah would do whatever it took to keep them that way, even if it meant stepping into a fight he might not win. Even if it meant risking everything he'd built in the 7 years since Margaret died. Because some things were worth fighting for. And the woman in his arms, and the baby sleeping down the hall, they were worth everything. The first week after the hearing passed in tense vigilance. Jonah half expected Ward to violate the protection order, to come storming back to the ranch with Pike and his guns blazing. But the days came and went with no sign of trouble beyond the occasional feeling of being watched when Jonah rode the fence lines. Elena moved through the house like someone waiting for a blow that might never come. She cooked and cleaned with the same efficiency as before, But Jonah noticed how she'd pause at windows, how her hand would drift to the pistol he'd insisted she keep in her apron pocket, how she'd count the hours until he came back from working the land. On the 8th day, Jonah found her standing on the porch at dawn, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the road that led to town. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "I keep thinking he's out there somewhere, planning, waiting." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "The judge's order won't stop Thomas. It'll just make him more careful." "Let him be careful. We'll be ready." Jonah sipped his coffee, watching the sun break over the mountains. "Corrigan sent word yesterday. He's tracked down 2 more witnesses from Clearwater, women who saw Ward hit you in public." Elena's eyes widened. "Mrs. Chen and Martha Collins. I didn't think they'd remember." "They remembered, and they're willing to testify." He paused. "Your mother-in-law also agreed to give a full deposition. Clara Ward is coming to town next month." "She is?" Elena's voice caught. "Clara was always kind to me. When Thomas hit her, I begged her to stay, to help me find a way out. But she said she'd already lost one son to his father's temper, and she couldn't watch history repeat itself." "One son?" "Thomas had a younger brother, Daniel. He died when Thomas was 15, killed by their father in a drunken rage. Clara never forgave herself for not leaving sooner." Elena's hands tightened around her cup. "Thomas swore he'd never be like his father." "But he was." "He is." Jonah absorbed this, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Violence passed down like inheritance, each generation learning from the last until someone had the courage to break the chain. "Well, Clara's breaking it now," he said. "Her testimony will carry weight with the judge. If we make it to the next hearing, we will." Elena turned to look at him, and in the early morning light, her face was shadowed with doubt. "You can't know that, Jonah. Thomas is resourceful. He's already faked his own death once. Who knows what he's capable of?" "Then we'll be more resourceful, more prepared." He set down his coffee and took her hands. "Elena, I need you to trust me. Trust that we're doing everything we can." "I do trust you. That's what scares me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've let myself believe in this. In us. In the possibility of a future where Lucas grows up safe and I'm free. And if Thomas takes it all away, he won't. But if he does, I won't survive it. Not again. I barely survived leaving him the first time." Jonah pulled her close, feeling her tremble against him. "You're stronger than you think. Strong enough to walk 10 miles in a snowstorm with a baby. Strong enough to stand in a courtroom and tell the truth. Strong enough to keep fighting." She rested her head against his chest. "I'm strong because you're here, because I'm not alone anymore. You'll never be alone again. I promise you that." They stood together as the sun rose higher, warming the frozen world around them. Behind them, through the window, Jonah could hear Lucas starting to wake, making his soft morning sounds. The sounds of life continuing, of hope persisting despite the darkness that threatened. The second week brought an unexpected visitor. Jonah was in the barn repairing a stall door when he heard a horse approach. He reached for the rifle he now kept close, then relaxed when he recognized the rider. James Corrigan dismounted, his expression grim. "What's wrong?" Jonah asked, meeting him in the yard. "Ward's filed a counter-complaint. Claims you assaulted him outside the courthouse, that you're holding Elena prisoner and forcing her to lie about the abuse." "That's insane." "I know, but he's got Pike and his men willing to swear they witnessed the assault, and he's requesting the judge reconsider the protection order based on your violent behavior." Corrigan handed Jonah a sheaf of papers. "There's a hearing next week. You'll need to testify." Jonah scanned the documents, anger building with each word. "He's trying to wear us down. Keep dragging us into court until we make a mistake." "Exactly. It's a common tactic. Exhaust your opponent's resources, their will to fight." Corrigan glanced toward the house. "How's Elena holding up?" "She's scared, trying not to show it, but I can tell." "She should be scared. Ward's not playing games anymore." The lawyer's voice dropped. "Jonah, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Are you prepared for this to get uglier?" "How much uglier can it get?" "Ward's lawyer is hinting at bringing adultery charges against Elena. Claims she abandoned her marriage to pursue a relationship with you. If they can prove adultery, it weakens her case significantly, makes her look like an unfit mother. Jonah felt his jaw tighten. There's nothing between us that would constitute adultery. Yet. But you admitted in court to having feelings for her. Ward's team will twist that, make it seem sordid. Corrigan met his eyes. They'll drag both your reputations through the mud if they think it'll help their case. Let them try. That's not all. Ward's been asking questions about Margaret, about how she died, about your state of mind after. I think he's building a narrative that you're mentally unstable, that you latched onto Elena as a replacement for your dead wife. The words hit Jonah like a physical blow. Margaret has nothing to do with this. Legally, no. But in terms of character assassination, Corrigan's expression was sympathetic. I'm sorry, Jonah. I know this is painful, but you need to be prepared for them to use everything they can find against you. After Corrigan left, Jonah stood in the yard for a long time, trying to master the rage and grief churning in his gut. The thought of Ward's lawyers picking through his life, dissecting his marriage to Margaret, using his grief as a weapon, it made him want to ride to town and settle this the old-fashioned way. But that's exactly what Ward wanted. A misstep. An act of violence that would prove their claims about his instability. He took a deep breath and went inside. Elena was at the kitchen table feeding Lucas mashed vegetables. The baby's face was covered in orange goo, and he was making happy gurgling sounds. The domestic scene was so normal, so peaceful, that it made Jonah's heart ache. That was Corrigan, he said, pulling out a chair. Elena looked up, reading his face. What happened? He told her about the counter-complaint, about the hearing, about the threat of adultery charges. With each word, he watched the color drain from her face. They're going to make me look like a whore, she said quietly. An unfaithful wife who abandoned her husband for another man. That's not true. Truth doesn't matter to Thomas. Only winning. She wiped Lucas's face with a cloth, her movements mechanical. Maybe I should go back. Tell the judge I was confused, that I want to reconcile. No. Jonah's voice was sharp. Don't even think that. But if it's the only way to end this, it's not ending this, Elena. It's surrendering. And surrender means going back to being beaten, controlled, living in fear. Is that what you want for Lucas? To watch his father abuse his mother? Tears spilled down her cheeks. No, of course not. But I can't keep dragging you into this. They're attacking you now, using Margaret's memory against you. Let them. I can take it. He reached across the table and took her hand. What I can't take is the thought of you giving up, of that bastard winning. He always wins, Jonah. That's what he does. He breaks people down until they have nothing left to fight with. Then he's never fought someone like me. Elena looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Why are you doing this? Really? You could wash your hands of this whole mess. Tell the judge you don't want to be involved anymore. Go back to your quiet life. Because that quiet life was killing me. Jonah squeezed her hand. You and Lucas woke me up. Made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond just surviving day to day. I'm not going back to that half-life, I won't. Even if it costs you everything? You keep asking me that, and my answer's always the same. You're worth it, both of you. Lucas chose that moment to bang his spoon on the table, spraying vegetable mash everywhere. Despite everything, Elena laughed, a small, broken sound that was still somehow full of hope. He's going to be a handful when he's older, she said, wiping the mess. Good. World needs more people who don't take things lying down. Jonah watched her with the baby, saw the fierce love in every gesture. We're going to win this, Elena. We're going to get through the hearing, build our case, and when that final custody decision comes, you're going to walk out of that courtroom as a free woman. And then what? Then we figure out what comes next, together. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. Elena's eyes searched his face. You mean that? Together? I do. Jonah stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. I know the timing's terrible. I know we're in the middle of a legal battle and nothing's certain. But I need you to know, when this is over, when you're free and safe, I want you to stay, not as my cook, as what? Her voice was barely a whisper. As my wife, if you'll have me. Elena's breath caught. Jonah, You don't have to answer now. We've got time. But I needed to say it, needed you to know that this isn't temporary for me. What I feel for you, it's real. It's permanent. I'm still married to Thomas. For now. But Corrigan thinks we can get the marriage dissolved based on the abuse and abandonment. And when that happens, when you're truly free, he stopped, suddenly uncertain. Unless you don't feel the same way. Unless I'm presuming too much. Elena cupped his face in her hands, and Jonah saw tears streaming down her cheeks again. But these were different tears. I feel the same way, she said. More than the same way. I love you, Jonah Hale. I think I started loving you that first night when you let me in from the cold without asking questions. When you saw me at my worst and still chose kindness. Elena, let me finish. I need to say this. She took a shaky breath. I never knew what love was supposed to feel like. With Thomas, it was control disguised as caring, but with you, you make me feel safe and strong and valued. You see me as a person, not property. And yes, when this is over, when I'm free, I want to be your wife. I want Lucas to grow up calling you father. I want to build a life here with you. Jonah pulled her close, Lucas between them, and kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks. When they broke apart, both were crying. Well, Elena said, laughing through her tears. That's something to fight for, isn't it? Everything to fight for. The hearing the following week was brutal. Ward's lawyer presented a carefully constructed narrative of Jonah as an unstable widower who'd manipulated a vulnerable woman. They brought up Margaret's death, suggested Jonah had never properly grieved, implied his judgment was compromised by loneliness and desperation. Pike testified that he'd witnessed Jonah threaten Ward outside the courthouse. The other hired men corroborated the story, their lies smooth and practiced. But Corrigan was ready. He cross-examined each witness methodically, poking holes in their timeline, highlighting the financial arrangement between Ward and his hired men, questioning their credibility. When it was Elena's turn to testify, she spoke clearly and calmly about the first time Thomas hit her, about the pattern of abuse that followed, about her decision to leave. Ward's lawyer tried to rattle her, suggesting she was lying, but Elena didn't break. I am not lying, she said, her voice steady. And I am not mentally ill. I am a woman who survived years of abuse and found the courage to escape. That's not weakness, that's strength. Jonah testified about finding Elena on his doorstep, about hiring her as his cook, about the professional arrangement that had slowly become something more. Did you seduce Mrs. Ward? The opposing lawyer asked. No, I treated her with respect and kindness. Apparently that was enough to make her feel safe for the first time in years. Isn't it true that you saw Mrs. Ward as a replacement for your deceased wife? Jonah felt the anger rise, but kept his voice level. My wife, Margaret, was irreplaceable. But that doesn't mean I'm not capable of caring about someone new. Elena isn't a replacement for anything. She's her own person, and I value her for who she is. When the judge finally called for a recess, both sides were exhausted. Corrigan pulled Jonah and Elena aside in the hallway. It could go either way, he said. Matthews is hard to read, but I think we made our case. When will he decide? Elena asked. Could be today, could be next week. Judges like to take their time with custody matters. They waited in tense silence as the courtroom refilled. Ward sat across the aisle, his expression confident. Too confident. When Judge Matthews returned, his face was grave. I've considered the evidence presented by both sides, he said. The counter-allegations of assault are serious, but I find the testimony of Mr. Pike and his associates to be questionable at best. These men are being paid by Mr. Ward, which compromises their credibility. Jonah felt Elena's hand tighten on his arm. However, the judge continued, I am concerned about the nature of the relationship between Mr. Hale and Mrs. Ward. While I don't believe there's evidence of adultery, the developing romantic attachment is problematic given that Mrs. Ward is still legally married. Your Honor, Corrigan stood. I'm not finished. Despite these concerns, I find that the evidence of abuse against Mr. Ward remains compelling. Therefore, I'm upholding the protection order with one modification. Matthews looked directly at Elena. Mrs. Ward, You will remain in Mr. Hale's household, but you will sleep in a separate bedroom and maintain proper distance. Any evidence of impropriety will result in an immediate review of this arrangement. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, Elena said quietly. Good. The full custody hearing remains scheduled for 2 months from now. Both parties are to avoid contact except through legal counsel. Court dismissed. Outside, Elena sagged against Jonah. 2 more months. We can do 2 months. Can we? Jonah, he's watching us now, looking for any excuse to claim impropriety. How are we supposed to… She stopped, aware of people passing by. We'll be careful, Jonah said. We'll follow the judge's instructions to the letter, and in 2 months this will be over. But as they climbed into the wagon for the ride home, Jonah saw Pike watching from across the street. The hired gun tipped his hat in mock courtesy, and Jonah understood the message clearly. They'd be watching, waiting, looking for any misstep. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Jonah and Elena sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and not touching, painfully aware of the space between them that the judge's order had mandated. This is ridiculous, Elena said. We're adults. We should be able to sit in the same room without it being considered improper. The judge is protecting his decision, making sure Ward can't claim we're acting inappropriately. I know. But it feels like even here, in your house, Thomas is controlling what I can and can't do. Jonah wanted to reach for her hand, but didn't. It's temporary, just until the final hearing. And what if we lose the final hearing? What if the judge decides that despite the abuse, Lucas belongs with his father? Then we appeal. We keep fighting. For how long? How many courtrooms? How many judges? Elena's voice rose with frustration. I'm tired, Jonah. Tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of having to prove that I deserve to keep my own child. I know, but… The sound of breaking glass cut him off. Jonah was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving toward the sitting room where the noise had come from. Elena followed, her own pistol drawn. The window was shattered, cold air pouring in. On the floor lay a rock wrapped in paper. Jonah picked it up carefully, unfolded the note. The message was short and written in crude block letters. Tick-tock, time's running out. Elena's face had gone white. He was here, right outside the house. Jonah moved to the broken window and scanned the darkness outside. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean no one was out there. Stay here, he said. Keep the gun ready. Jonah, don't… But he was already out the door, moving into the night with his rifle raised. He circled the house, checking for tracks, for any sign of the intruder. He found boot prints in the snow beneath the broken window, leading away toward the tree line. Jonah followed them for 100 yards before they disappeared onto rocky ground where snow hadn't settled. Whoever had thrown the rock was long gone. When he returned to the house, Elena was standing in the kitchen with Lucas in her arms. The baby was crying, frightened by the crash and the tension. Nothing, Jonah said. Whoever it was is gone. But they'll be back. Elena rocked Lucas mechanically. This is just the beginning. Thomas wants us to know he can get to us anytime he wants. Jonah set down the rifle and moved to board up the broken window. As he worked, his mind raced. The protection order meant Ward couldn't approach Elena directly, but it didn't stop him from sending his hired men to intimidate them. We need to report this to the sheriff, Elena said. And tell him what? Someone threw a rock through my window? Without proof it was Ward or his men, there's nothing the sheriff can do. So we just sit here and wait for the next threat? No. Jonah finished securing the board and turned to face her. We go on the offensive. What do you mean? Ward wants us scared, wants us to make a mistake. Instead, we show him we're not afraid. We gather our evidence, we build our case, and we go into that final hearing so prepared that there's no way we can lose. Elena looked skeptical. And in the meantime, we're careful. We follow every rule the judge laid out. We don't give Ward anything he can use against us. Jonah's voice softened. I know it's hard. I know you're tired. But we're so close, Elena. 2 more months and you're free. She looked down at Lucas, who had finally stopped crying and was watching them with those same alert eyes. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Believe in us. The weeks that followed tested them in ways neither had anticipated. They maintained strict propriety, separate bedrooms, no physical contact beyond the occasional accidental brush of hands. Conversations kept businesslike whenever possible. But the tension built like water behind a dam. Every glance lingered too long. Every word carried unspoken meaning. The space between them hummed with everything they couldn't say, couldn't do. Ward's harassment continued. Rocks through windows became a regular occurrence. Once, Jonah found his fence cut, his cattle wandering. Another time, someone poisoned his well, forcing him to haul water from the creek for a week, while Corrigan filed complaints that went nowhere. The sheriff was sympathetic, but helpless without proof. And Ward was too smart to get caught. Through it all, Elena remained strong. She cooked and cleaned and cared for Lucas with the same dedication as always. But Jonah could see the toll it was taking, the shadows under her eyes, the way she startled at sudden noises, the exhaustion that never quite left her face. 1 month before the final hearing, Clara Ward arrived in town. Corrigan arranged a meeting at his office, and Jonah brought Elena and Lucas. Clara was a thin woman in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes that reminded Jonah painfully of Elena's. When she saw her grandson for the first time, she burst into tears. "He's beautiful," she said, holding Lucas with trembling hands. "He looks like Daniel did at this age." "Your other son," Elena said softly. "Yes." Clara's face was full of old grief. "The boy my husband killed. The boy I failed to protect." "You didn't fail him, Clara. His father... I should have left sooner. Should have taken both my boys and run, but I was afraid. Thought I had nowhere to go, no way to survive. So I stayed, and Daniel paid the price." She looked at Elena with fierce determination. "I won't let history repeat itself. Thomas is his father's son, no matter how much he claims otherwise, and I'll tell that to any judge who asks." Over the next 2 hours, Clara gave her deposition. She spoke clearly about witnessing Thomas hit Elena, about the bruises she'd seen, about the time he'd struck her for trying to intervene. "He said I was interfering in his marriage," Clara recalled. "Said what happened between a man and his wife was private. When I told him he was becoming his father, he hit me so hard I saw stars. I packed my things that night and never went back." "Why didn't you try to help Elena leave?" Corrigan asked gently. "Because I'm a coward." Clara's voice broke. "I told myself she was strong, that she'd figure it out. But the truth is, I was too afraid of my own son to stand up to him. It's taken me 6 months to find the courage to be here now." "You're here now," Elena said. "That's what matters." Clara gripped her hand. "When this is over, when you're free, I'd like to be part of Lucas's life. If you'll let me. I know I don't deserve it. You're his grandmother. Of course you'll be part of his life." The two women embraced, and Jonah had to look away from the raw emotion in the moment. After Clara left, Corrigan reviewed the case with them one more time. With Clara's testimony, the statements from the neighbors and Dr. Morrison, and the documented harassment since the first hearing, we have a strong case. Stronger than before. "Strong enough to win?" Jonah asked. "I think so, but I need to prepare you for the possibility that we don't. Matthews is old school. He might still rule that a child belongs with his father, abuse or not." "Then we appeal," Elena said. "We take it to a higher court." "That could take months, years even." "I don't care. I'll fight for as long as it takes." Corrigan smiled. "That's the spirit. But let's win this one first, shall we?" The night before the final hearing, Jonah couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed listening to the house settle, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Margaret's death 7 years ago, the long, cold years of isolation, Elena appearing on his doorstep like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was making. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. His door opened quietly, and Elena slipped inside. "We shouldn't," Jonah said, sitting up. "I know, but I can't sleep, and I can't face tomorrow alone." She moved to his bed and sat on the edge, careful not to touch him. Can you just hold me? Nothing more. I just need to feel safe for a little while." Jonah knew it was a risk. If anyone found out, if Ward's men were watching somehow, but he couldn't send her away. Not tonight. He opened his arms and Elena curled against him, her head on his chest. They lay together in the darkness, fully clothed, just holding each other. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Elena whispered. "I want you to know, these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left. You showed me what love is supposed to look like." "We're going to win tomorrow," Jonah said, "and then we'll have a lifetime to be happy. Promise me something. Anything. If we lose, if the judge gives Lucas to Thomas, promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll help me run, that we'll disappear together and never look back." Jonah tightened his arms around her. "I promise. But it won't come to that." "How can you be so sure?" "Because the universe doesn't save someone from freezing to death in the snow just to hand them back to their abuser. Because justice has to mean something. And because I refuse to believe that love and courage and truth can lose to violence and lies." Elena lifted her head and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of hope and fear mixed together. "I love you, Jonah Hale." "I love you too. Now try to get some sleep. We have a battle to win tomorrow." She stayed in his arms until just before dawn, then slipped back to her own room before the sun rose. Jonah lay alone in his bed, listening to her move through the house, and thought about all the promises he'd made. He intended to keep every single one. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, they would face Thomas Ward one final time, and Jonah would do whatever it took, say whatever needed saying, fight however hard he needed to fight, to make sure Elena and Lucas stayed safe and free, because they were his family now. And he would die before he let anyone tear them apart. The morning of the final hearing dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day where the sky stretched endlessly blue and every sound carried sharp and clean through the frozen air. Jonah stood on the porch watching the sunrise, his coffee steaming in the cold, trying to calm the nerves that had been building since before dawn. Behind him, the door opened and Elena emerged, dressed in her best dress with Lucas bundled in her arms. The baby was awake and alert, those watchful eyes taking in the morning light. "Ready?" Jonah asked. Elena's smile was fragile but determined. "As ready as I'll ever be." They rode to town in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The road was empty, the world still asleep. By the time they reached the courthouse, a small crowd had already gathered. Townspeople who'd followed the case, reporters from the territorial newspaper, and standing near the entrance, Thomas Ward flanked by Pike and his men. Ward's eyes locked onto Elena as they approached, and Jonah saw the possessiveness in that gaze, the rage barely contained beneath a civilized surface. Ward was dressed immaculately in an expensive suit, every inch the wronged husband seeking justice. "Elena," Ward called out as they passed, "it's not too late to end this. Come home where you belong." Elena kept walking, her spine straight, but Jonah felt her tremble. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Jonah spotted Clara Ward in the front row, her face set with determination. Corrigan was already at their table, papers organized, looking as prepared as a man could be. "How are we looking?" Jonah asked quietly as they sat. "Good, strong, but Matthews is unpredictable." Corrigan glanced at Elena. "Remember what we discussed. Stay calm, answer clearly, don't let Ward's lawyer rattle you." "I remember." Judge Matthews entered, and the courtroom rose. The old judge settled into his chair with a heavy sigh, as if already weary of what was to come. "We're here for the final custody hearing in the matter of Ward versus Ward," he said. "I've reviewed all the documentation submitted by both parties. This is a serious matter involving the welfare of a child, and I expect both sides to conduct themselves with appropriate gravity. Mr. Caldwell, you may begin." Ward's lawyer stood, smoothing his expensive suit. "Your Honor, my client's position is simple and supported by law. Thomas Ward is the legal father of Lucas Ward. He is the legal husband of Elena Ward. Despite the accusations leveled against him, he has never been convicted of any crime. He seeks only what is rightfully his, the return of his family." "And the allegations of abuse?" Matthews asked. "Unproven, Your Honor. We have hearsay, we have assumptions, but we have no police reports, no arrests, no convictions. What we do have is evidence of a woman who abandoned her marriage and her legal obligations, who has developed an inappropriate relationship with another man while still legally married." Corrigan was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Ward's relationship with Mr. Hale has been entirely proper and occurred only after she fled an abusive situation." "Save it for your turn, Mr. Corrigan." Matthews waved him down. Continue, Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell called his first witness, a doctor from Clearwater who'd treated Elena during her pregnancy but who claimed he'd never seen evidence of abuse. Did Mrs. Ward ever complain of being struck by her husband? Caldwell asked. No, sir. She said she was clumsy, that she fell frequently. And you believed her? I had no reason not to. But on cross-examination, Corrigan dismantled the testimony. Doctor, in your medical opinion, were Mrs. Ward's injuries consistent with simple falls? They could have been. That's not what I asked. Were they consistent with simple falls, or could they have been caused by deliberate strikes? The doctor hesitated. Both are possible. Did you document your suspicions in her medical file? Yes, I noted that some injuries seemed unusual. Unusual how? The pattern, the frequency. Falls don't typically result in bruising to the upper arms, the ribs, the back. Where do such bruises typically come from, doctor? From being grabbed, struck, pushed. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Ward's face had gone red. Corrigan called Clara Ward next. The older woman walked to the stand with her head high, and when she was sworn in, her voice was steady. Mrs. Ward, you're the defendant's mother, is that correct? Yes. And you lived with your son Thomas and his wife Elena for approximately 1 year? Yes, I did. During that time, did you witness your son strike his wife? Clara's eyes found Thomas in the courtroom. For a moment, mother and son stared at each other across the space. Then Clara spoke clearly. Yes. Multiple times. He would hit her for small things, burning dinner, speaking out of turn, looking at him the wrong way. I tried to intervene, and he struck me as well. Why didn't you report this to the authorities? Because I was afraid of my son. Because I'd already lost one child to violence and couldn't face losing another. Her voice broke. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when my grandson's welfare is at stake. Thomas Ward stood abruptly. You're a liar, a bitter old woman trying to punish me because you couldn't save Daniel. Mr. Ward, sit down, Matthews banged his gavel. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Ward sat, but his hands were clenched into fists, his face twisted with rage. Jonah saw it clearly now, the mask slipping, revealing the violence underneath. And more importantly, the judge was seeing it too. Corrigan continued methodically through his witnesses. Dr. Morrison's written testimony about suspicious injuries, statements from neighbors who'd heard screaming and crashing from the Ward household, the pattern of abuse documented over years. Then it was Elena's turn. She stood and walked to the witness stand with Lucas in her arms. The baby was quiet, content, and the image they presented, young mother and innocent child, was powerful. Caldwell went after her immediately, trying to paint her as unstable, as a woman who'd abandoned her marriage for another man. Mrs. Ward, isn't it true that you developed romantic feelings for Jonah Hale while still married to my client? I developed feelings for Jonah after I left Thomas, after I thought Thomas was dead. But you weren't certain he was dead, were you? You hoped he was dead. I hoped I was free from abuse. Yes. And when you discovered Mr. Hale was a lonely widower with property and resources, you saw an opportunity, didn't you? Elena's eyes flashed. I saw a man who treated me with kindness, who didn't see me as property to be controlled. That's not an opportunity, Mr. Caldwell. That's basic human decency, which your client never showed me. You claim you were abused, yet you never sought help from law enforcement. Because my husband told me if I went to the police, he'd kill me, and I believed him because I'd seen what he was capable of. How convenient that you only developed this story after meeting Mr. Hale. It's not a story, Elena's voice rose, strong and clear. I lived in fear for 5 years. I was beaten, controlled, made to feel worthless. When Thomas set that fire and told me to run, I finally saw a chance to escape. So I took it. I took my son and I ran because I refused to let him grow up thinking that violence is love. She was crying now, but her voice never wavered. Lucas reached up and touched her face, and the courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. I am not mentally ill, Elena continued. I am not a bad mother. I am a woman who survived and who will do anything, to protect my child. If that makes me unfit in your eyes, then your definition of fitness is broken. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Matthews banged his gavel for order, but Jonah could see something in the judge's face. Respect, maybe, or understanding. Caldwell tried to recover, but the damage was done. Elena's raw honesty had cut through all his careful narrative. Finally, it was Jonah's turn. He took the stand, aware of every eye in the room on him. "Mr. Hale," Caldwell began, "you admit to having romantic feelings for a married woman?" "I have feelings for Elena, yes, but those feelings developed after she came to me seeking work, after I learned about her situation." "How convenient. A beautiful woman appears on your doorstep, and suddenly you're willing to risk everything, your reputation, your property, your freedom, to help her. What do you expect in return?" "Nothing." "Nothing? You expect me to believe?" "I expect you to believe that some people do the right thing because it's right, not because they expect payment." Jonah's voice was steady. "Elena needed help. I was in a position to provide it, that's all. Isn't it true that you saw Mrs. Ward as a replacement for your deceased wife?" The question hit like a physical blow, but Jonah had been prepared for it. "My wife, Margaret, was irreplaceable. Her death left a hole in my life that nothing can fill." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But that doesn't mean I'm not capable of caring about someone new. Elena isn't a replacement. She's a woman I've come to respect and admire for her courage and strength. She's a mother fighting for her child. And yes, I love her. But that love doesn't diminish what I felt for Margaret. The heart has room for more than one person." He looked directly at Elena as he said it, saw the tears streaming down her face. "If the court grants custody to Mrs. Ward," Caldwell pressed, "what are your intentions?" "To support her in any way she needs, to provide a home for her and Lucas, and if she'll have me, when she's legally free to do so, to marry her." The courtroom burst into conversation. Matthews banged his gavel repeatedly. When order was finally restored, the judge looked at both lawyers. Closing arguments. Caldwell went first, making a passionate case for traditional family values, for a father's rights, for giving Thomas Ward another chance. Then Corrigan stood, and his voice was quiet but powerful. "Your Honor, this case isn't about tradition or rights or second chances. It's about safety. It's about a child's welfare. The evidence is overwhelming that Thomas Ward abused his wife for years. His own mother testified to it, medical professionals documented it, neighbors witnessed it." He gestured to Ward. "Look at him, Your Honor. Look at how he's conducted himself in this courtroom. The outbursts, the barely controlled rage. Is that the behavior of a man who should have custody of an infant? Now look at Elena Ward, a woman who walked 10 miles through snow to find work. Who had the courage to testify despite her fear? Who put her child's welfare above everything else? She's not perfect, Your Honor, but she's a good mother, and Lucas deserves to grow up safe, in a home without violence." Corrigan sat down, and the courtroom fell silent. Judge Matthews reviewed his notes for what felt like hours. Finally, he looked up. "I've considered all the evidence presented. This has been one of the more difficult cases I've presided over." He paused. "Mr. Ward, I find your testimony less than credible. Your behavior in this courtroom has been erratic and concerning. The weight of evidence suggests you did indeed abuse your wife, regardless of whether you were ever formally charged." Ward started to stand, but his lawyer pulled him back down. "Mrs. Ward," Matthews continued, "I find your testimony compelling and consistent with the documented evidence. While your decision to leave was legally complicated, I believe it was motivated by genuine fear for your safety and your child's welfare." Elena's hand found Jonah's under the table, gripping tight. "Therefore, I am granting full custody of Lucas Ward to his mother, Elena Ward. Mr. Ward, you are prohibited from contacting, approaching, or communicating with your former wife or child. This order is permanent and enforceable in all territories." The courtroom erupted. Elena collapsed against Jonah, sobbing. Clara Ward was crying openly. Ward was shouting something, but Jonah couldn't hear it over the noise. Matthews banged his gavel. "Furthermore, I am dissolving the marriage between Thomas and Elena Ward on grounds of abuse and abandonment. Mrs. Ward, you are free to remarry as soon as you wish. Court is adjourned." They'd won. They'd actually won. Jonah held Elena as she cried, feeling his own tears streaming down his face. Lucas, caught between them, made a happy gurgling sound as if he understood. Ward was still shouting as deputies escorted him from the courtroom. "This isn't over. You hear me, Elena. This isn't over." But it was over. The judge had spoken. The law had, for once, protected the vulnerable instead of the powerful. Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine broke through the winter clouds. Corrigan shook Jonah's hand, then pulled him into a brief embrace. "Congratulations, both of you." "Thank you, James, for everything." Clara approached tentatively, and Elena immediately pulled her into a hug. "Thank you for speaking up, for being brave." "I should have been brave years ago." Clara looked down at Lucas, her eyes soft. "May I?" Elena handed over her son, and Clara held her grandson with trembling hands, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. They stood together on the courthouse steps, Elena, Jonah, Lucas, and Clara, while townspeople offered congratulations and reporters shouted questions. But Jonah barely heard any of it. All he could see was Elena's face, radiant with relief and happiness. "Let's go home," he said softly. "Home," Elena repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes. Let's go home." The ride back to the ranch felt different from every other trip they'd made. The tension that had been their constant companion for months was finally gone. Elena sat close to Jonah, Lucas on her lap, and they talked about the future, about spring planting, about fixing up the spare bedroom for Lucas, about a wedding come summer when the wildflowers bloomed. When they reached the ranch, Jonah helped Elena down from the wagon, and for a moment they just stood there looking at the house that had become their sanctuary. "It's really over," Elena said wonderingly. "I'm free." "You're free." She turned to him, her face serious. "I meant what I said before. I love you, Jonah Hale, and I want to build a life with you, raise Lucas here, maybe give him brothers and sisters someday." "Is that a proposal?" Jonah teased gently. "Maybe, if you're not going to make one." Jonah laughed and pulled her close, careful of the baby between them. "Elena Ward, soon to be Elena Hale, will you marry me? Will you let me be Lucas's father and build a family with me in this house? Will you fill it with light and laughter and love the way you've already started to?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her there in the yard, with the spring sun warming their faces and Lucas making happy sounds between them. And for the first time in 7 years, Jonah felt complete. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation and healing. Elena gradually relaxed, the constant tension leaving her shoulders, the fear fading from her eyes. She smiled more, laughed more, moved through the house like she truly belonged there. Lucas started pulling himself up on furniture, taking his first wobbling steps while Jonah and Elena watched with pride. Clara visited often, becoming a fixture in their lives, a grandmother who'd finally found redemption in protecting the next generation. They heard through Corrigan that Ward had left the territory, gone back east to escape his debts and his shame. Pike and his men had scattered, looking for new employers. The shadow that had hung over them for so long had finally lifted. On a warm day in late May, when the meadow behind the house was carpeted with wildflowers, Jonah and Elena were married. It was a small ceremony, just Corrigan, Clara, a few neighbors, and the minister from town. Elena wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, and Jonah wore his best suit. But what made the ceremony perfect was Lucas, now nearly a year old, standing between them, holding onto their hands, babbling happily as if adding his own vows to theirs. "Do you, Jonah Hale, take Elena to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Jonah's voice was strong and sure. "And do you, Elena, take Jonah to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." She was crying, but these were tears of joy. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jonah pulled Elena close and kissed her softly, aware of their small audience, but caring only about the woman in his arms. When they pulled apart, Lucas was clapping his small hands together, making everyone laugh. They celebrated with a simple meal at the ranch: roasted chicken, fresh bread, Clara's apple pie. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the guests departed one by one until only Jonah, Elena, and Lucas remained. Elena put Lucas to bed in his newly painted room, singing him a lullaby that Margaret had once sung to Jonah. It didn't hurt to hear it anymore. Instead, it felt like the past and present weaving together, like Margaret giving her blessing to this new family. When Elena emerged from Lucas's room, she found Jonah standing on the porch watching the stars come out. "He's asleep," she said, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "Good, because I want my wife's full attention." Elena laughed, the sound joyful and free. "Your wife, that's going to take some getting used to." "We have time." Jonah turned in her embrace, looking down at her upturned face. "We have all the time in the world." They stood together watching the night sky, and Jonah thought about the journey that had brought them here. 7 years of grief and isolation, ended by a knock on the door on a freezing winter night. A desperate woman with a baby in her arms, looking for nothing more than shelter and work. But what she'd found, what they'd both found, was so much more. She'd found safety, freedom, and love. He'd found a reason to live again, to hope again, to open his heart to the possibility of happiness. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, resting her head against his chest. "That I'm grateful you knocked on my door that night." "So am I. Best decision I ever made." "Coming here?" "No." She looked up at him, her gray eyes reflecting the starlight. "Choosing to keep fighting, to believe I deserved better, to hope that somewhere out there was a life worth living." She touched his face gently. "You showed me that life, Jonah. You showed me what it feels like to be valued, protected, loved. You gave me and Lucas a home. You gave me the same thing. You reminded me that the heart can heal, that love isn't a one-time gift, but something that can grow again if you let it." He kissed her forehead. "We saved each other, Elena." "We did." She smiled. "And now we get to build something beautiful together." They went inside hand in hand, closing the door on the past and stepping into a future bright with promise. The house that had been so cold and empty for so long was now filled with warmth and life. In his room, Lucas slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams babies dream. In the morning, he would wake to a household where love was patient and kind, where his mother smiled without fear, where the man he would learn to call father was strong and gentle. He would grow up never knowing what his biological father had been like, never understanding the violence his mother had escaped. Instead, he would learn about hard work and honest love, about protecting those weaker than yourself, about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. And someday, when he was older, Elena would tell him the story of the winter she walked 10 miles through the snow with him in her arms, and how a lonely rancher had opened his door and changed both their lives forever. But that was a story for another day. Tonight, Jonah and Elena climbed the stairs to the bedroom they would now share, leaving behind the separate rooms that had been mandated by the judge's order. They fell asleep in each other's arms, safe and warm, and finally, truly free. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Elena's cooking and household management brought order and comfort, while Jonah's work ethic and land knowledge kept them profitable. Clara became a regular presence, often staying for weeks at a time, delighting in watching Lucas grow. She taught Elena family recipes and told her stories about Thomas's brother Daniel, the gentle boy who should have lived. Sometimes late at night, Jonah would wake and find Elena standing by Lucas's crib, watching their son sleep. He understood the impulse, the need to reassure herself that this was real, that they were safe, that the nightmare was truly over. He would go to her and wrap his arms around her, and she would lean back against him, and together they would watch the steady rise and fall of Lucas's breathing. "I still can't believe we made it," she would whisper. "Believe it. This is real. This is ours." And she would turn in his arms and kiss him, and the darkness would lose its power, replaced by the warmth of their love. Lucas took his first real steps on a sunny October morning, walking from Elena to Jonah across the kitchen floor. They both cheered, and the boy laughed with delight, immediately trying again. "He's going to be running before we know it," Elena said, scooping him up and spinning him around. Just like his mother, always moving forward, never looking back. Elena set Lucas down and came to Jonah, slipping her arms around his neck. "I do look back sometimes, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because everything I went through led me here. To you. To this life." And I look back at 7 years of loneliness and think the same thing. All that grief, all that isolation, it brought me to the exact moment when you needed someone and I needed someone, and we found each other. Fate, Elena said, or luck, or grace, whatever you want to call it. Jonah kissed her softly. I'm just grateful. So am I. By the time winter came again, a full year since Elena had first appeared on Jonah's doorstep, their family had grown. Not in number, not yet, but in depth. They'd built traditions, created memories, woven their lives together so tightly that it was hard to remember a time when they'd been separate. On the anniversary of that first night, Jonah came in from the barn to find Elena had made a special dinner. Candles lit the table, and she'd even opened a bottle of wine that Corrigan had given them as a wedding present. What's the occasion? Jonah asked, though he knew. 1 year ago tonight, I knocked on your door, scared, freezing, desperate, and you let me in. Best decision I ever made. Mine too. She poured wine for both of them. To second chances. To new beginnings, Jonah countered. To love, Elena finished. They toasted and drank, and then Elena set down her glass with a smile that was equal parts nervous and excited. There's something else we should toast to, she said. What's that? The fact that come summer, Lucas is going to be a big brother. For a moment, Jonah couldn't breathe. Then the meaning of her words hit him, and joy flooded through him so intense it was almost painful. You're pregnant? Yes. Elena laughed at his expression. I've been waiting for the right time to tell you, and tonight felt perfect. Jonah crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. How long have you known? A few weeks. I wanted to be sure. She pulled back to look at him. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He kissed her deeply. A baby. Our baby. Yes. Ours. That night, after Lucas was asleep and the dishes were done, they sat together by the fire and talked about the future, about names and nurseries and whether the baby would have Elena's gray eyes or Jonah's brown ones. I was so scared to be pregnant before, Elena confessed. With Lucas, every kick was a reminder that I was trapped. But this, she placed Jonah's hand on her still flat stomach. This feels like joy, like hope, like proof that we really did survive and build something beautiful. We did, and we'll build even more. Jonah leaned his forehead against hers. A whole house full of children if you want. Noise and chaos and laughter filling every room. I want that, Elena whispered. I want all of it. The months that followed were among the happiest of Jonah's life. Watching Elena's belly grow, feeling the baby kick beneath his hand, preparing the nursery together. It was everything he'd lost with Margaret, given back to him in a different form. And this time there was no tragedy. Elena's pregnancy progressed smoothly. The local doctor, having heard the full story of her first marriage, was attentive and careful, making sure she had everything she needed. Clara came to stay as Elena's due date approached, eager to help with Lucas and the new baby. The house buzzed with activity and anticipation. On a warm July evening, as the sun was setting over the mountains, Elena's labor began. It was long and difficult, but when dawn broke, a healthy baby girl entered the world, squalling and red-faced and perfect. She's beautiful, Jonah said, tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. What should we name her? Elena asked, exhausted but radiant. Jonah looked down at the tiny face, thinking about all they'd overcome to get to this moment. Hope, he said. Her name should be Hope. Hope Hale. Elena smiled. It's perfect. Lucas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle and babble to her in his own language, making her smile in her sleep. Watching them together, Jonah felt his heart swell with a contentment he'd never thought possible. His family, the one he'd lost and the one he'd found, had taught him that love wasn't finite, that the heart could break and heal and love again, even deeper than before. One evening, as autumn painted the world in shades of gold and red, Jonah stood on the porch with Hope in his arms while Elena and Lucas picked the last of the garden vegetables. Clara was in the kitchen starting dinner, humming an old tune. He thought about how empty this porch had been just 2 years ago, how silent the house, How cold his heart. And now it overflowed with life and love and laughter. Elena looked up from the garden and caught his eye. She smiled, that radiant smile that had first broken through his walls, and blew him a kiss. Jonah smiled back, feeling the weight of his daughter in his arms, hearing his son's laughter, seeing his wife's joy. This was what he'd been waiting for during all those dark years. This was what he'd been saved for, not to replace what he'd lost, but to build something new, something strong enough to honor the past while embracing the future. He looked down at Hope's tiny face, at eyes that were just beginning to focus on the world around her. "Welcome home, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to a life full of love." And as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of promise, Jonah Hale, husband, father, protector, carried his daughter inside to the warmth and light that would always, from this day forward, fill his home. The widow he'd hired to cook had brought him so much more than meals. She'd brought him back to life. She'd given him a family. She'd reminded him that even in the darkest winter, spring always comes again. And standing in his kitchen, surrounded by everyone he loved, Jonah knew with absolute certainty that he would spend the rest of his days making sure Elena and their children never doubted for a single moment that they were safe, cherished, and home. Because some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with the much harder, much more beautiful work of building a life together, day by day, choice by choice, loving each other through every season that comes. And that was the truest kind of love there was.